We are proud members of the Spy Podcast Network. Find out more at www.spypodcasts.com.
Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, trading in my rolled up magazine for a microphone.
Well, the question goes to you, Cam. What are we talking about this week?
We are wrapping up the Bourne franchise. We covered all the films a little while back, but we want to do a roundtable the way we did with the Brosnan era of James Bond and look back at the franchise as a whole and break it down to the elements, all the various aspects that make it so special.
And of course, this does mark the day of release of this episode marks the 20th anniversary of the release of the Bourne Identity. So I thought in celebration of that momentous occasion, we would put this together.
Yeah, it's a perfect timing. And we'll, of course, also have an interview out this week with Nick Ignate, who played the assassin Bourne fought off with a ballpoint pen. That'll be dropping later this week. So it is an all-around celebration of the Bourne franchise.
We are born again. That will be the first of many puns. But this is a big project to tackle 5 films in one episode. So to do this, I've had to activate our best assets. Firstly, joining us, zooming and enhancing on a monitor near you, film and TV editor extraordinaire, it is Ashley Lynch. Hello, Ashley, how are you?
Hey guys, how's it going? Happy to be here.
And her backup. He's taken his blue and green chems. It's the host of Behind the Stunts podcast, Mr. Jon Auty. Hello, sir.
Hello to you all. How are you doing?
Very well. We are both thrilled to be here. We actually have some experts for once, which is nice because we don't know anything.
But
I suppose before we get to the Bourne of it all, let's get to know you both a wee bit better. So let's go with you first, Ashley. I mentioned it in your intro, film and TV editor. But, what's sort of a little bit about you, what you do for work?
Yeah, I'm an editor. I work in film and TV. I work on a whole scores of productions, but the biggest thing that I've worked on probably the last 5 years is I'm one of the editors on the Lego Ninjago series. So I make Lego minifigs to have martial arts fights together, which is fun and fantastic. And the new season is going to be rolling out, I think, later this month, which is one of the most epic seasons we've ever done. So that's really exciting. And aside from that, I've also got another podcast that I'm regularly part of called Girls on Pop, which you can find at atcpod.ca, where we just talk about movies and stuff, which comes out semi-regularly.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes below. But I'm interested just to sort of explore the filming and editing, because I think, and we'll get to that in a little bit, because I think Bourne as a franchise has a lot to owe it to its editing. But
very much so.
Yeah, definitely. But in terms of your connection to spy films in general, like what are sort of your favorites that you go to?
I think my favorites have got to be the Mission Impossible series. I just really love what those films are doing, even the ones that are kind of like outside of like the general trend of, the entire series, like John Woo's film. Even though that one is like a little bit of a dumpster fire, it is absolutely my kind of trash. And it kind of hits that sweet spot of like, it's got the action, it's got the intrigue, it's like it balances everything really well into creating this perfect package that doesn't get so ridiculously mired in lore, which I think can be a problem for some of these movies sometimes. And I think that's probably my go-to for like spy action adventure type films.
There is some good connective tissue between the Mission Impossible films and the Bourne franchise. I actually have a little note about later, so we'll come back to that. So that's good. You like your spy action adventures, and I think we've definitely got the right series for you this week. John, what about you, sir?
Well, I suppose my love of spy movies really started with Bond, and then on the back of that would have been Matt Helm. I liked the Matt Helm. I thought Dean Martin was wonderful as Matt Helm, primarily because rumour had it at the time. I didn't know until much later on, but rumour had it at the time. But he was up 3 sheets to the wind, whenever he filmed these things. When in point of fact, he'd got the apple juice routine and was just very, very good at what he did. Now, some of his television stuff later on, he was actually 4 sheets to the wind, I think, by that time. But the Matt Helm movies, they're great fun. They're great fun action. They've got some daft dialogue, great score, music score. So I loved all those. The Flint movies, I loved all of those as well. And I suppose really, they were the kind of movies that got me a lot. I mean, once I saw Bond, everything else was just an element of that. There was Bond. It's that umbrella. There's the Bond, and underneath that umbrella, you had all of these other franchises going left, right, and centre. But I agree completely there in connection with the Mission Impossible movies, which I love very much. Even. I can't do it. No, I was going to say even the John Woo one, but I can't. I've got so many issues with that movie I can't tell you. But the idea of that movie itself, that concept there with the longevity of it and the way it just throws the kitchen sink at absolutely everything. And if you compare it, of course, to the TV show, it's like chalk and cheese, But it's still huge fun, and I love a good spy flick.
And we did you a disservice there. Of course, you are the host of Behind the Stunts and your YouTube channel as well, the podcast. You have a deep-rooted love of stunts. I mean, I've spoken to you. We had a pint together in the pub and spoken all about this.
We've met in public.
Yes,
there was people there who saw us together. Yes.
There's no photo evidence. Oh no, there is one.
Oh no, there is. Yes, absolutely.
Damn. But
the negatives, you still have to make that payment. I'm sorry, but there we are. That's the way it works.
Scandalous.
But of course, one of the and this is the reason why I wanted to get you both together on this episode is because editing and how you make a picture is a very important thing in the Bourne series, but also fighting, stunts, action is the lifeblood of the Bourne franchise, and it is the lifeblood of what you talk about online.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as good as any individual stunt performer is, as good as any disciplined fighter is, regardless of what their background is, regardless of what type of fighting you're doing, as good as any actor is, who can remember routines, can remember choreography, can improvise or be given the choice to improvise in a scene. Those fights are terrible if the editing is no good. Absolutely crucial. They work hand in hand with each other. And I suppose, if you go back to the early days of cinema, it was often a locked off camera and it was a wide shot and people going from one side of frame to the other, throwing haymakers in 3-minute fights. Whereas now, you might have 90 seconds, which is a very long time, but you may have 90 seconds of full-on action, and at the end of it, you are exhausted because the editing has enhanced the whole thing. And I think it's massively important. So fights themselves, they have got better over a period of time. Experiences that they take little bits from here. That's what all the guys in the Bourne pictures do. They take elements of this, elements of that, and they put it together, and that's nice, this is different, let's do this. They bring in actors or fighters who are good at certain areas. But if the editor isn't doing his job properly, it's just a lousy fight. And I think the proof of the pudding is definitely in the eating with this series, whereas the fights are top draw right the way through. And you sit there and go, oh, a fight's coming, I can watch this. And you'll sit down and watch it. That's what I do. I was having a conversation with a guy earlier who was saying that he has to watch the whole movie. He can't watch elements of it. I could, I've got DVDs of just fights, or just car gags, or just horse stuff, because I'm transfixed firstly by the action that's happening on screen, but also by the editing and the way in which the editor then says, what can I do to improve this? This fight's a bit slow. I need to pace it up a bit. I know, I'll do this, and then I'll cut to this, and then I'll do that. And all of a sudden it's much, much better. It doesn't take an awful lot, but it does make a huge difference. And I think these are great examples.
Well, it's clear that we've assembled the pros, the best assets in the game to talk about Bourne. And the first question I'm going to ask everyone, except for, I suppose, Cam and I, because we've gone on record, is your initial connections to sort of the Bourne franchise. Because Cam and I are often found running along the beach in cargo shorts.
Obviously.
Yeah, it's just what we do. But Ashley, over to you first. Before we approached you, I'm sure you'd seen some of the Bourne films, but what were your thoughts on them?
I've always enjoyed the Bourne movies. I think, like a lot of people, when they first came out, or when the first one came out, you're like, wait, Matt Damon's doing action adventure, the squeaky faced boy from, Saving Private Ryan, and what was the one that he did with
Talented Mr. Ripley?
Yeah, Talented Mr. Ripley and Good Will Hunting, stuff like that. And it's like you thought of Matt Damon a certain way. Good enough actor, sure, but action star? I don't know about this. But there was enough other elements there. You had Doug Liman directing, and I really liked what he did with Go. And you have Franca Potente, who I will always show up for. And Clive Owen, smaller role, but still he was coming off hot stuff of like Croupier. And it's like, okay, well, this looks interesting. And you watch it, and it's just a legitimately good action movie. It sucks you in. And I think it's kind of telling that the first movie actually didn't do that great theatrically, but it was one of those movies that once it hit home video, once it hit DVD, it did so well and sold so well on DVD that was enough to convince Universal to keep going forward with the series. And then the second one comes out, and the numbers are just through the roof. And now it's like a full-blown franchise that they're into. So, but I've always really been into the films. I think it stumbles in various places, but I think it's a really cool franchise that has a great hook at the center of it and a really engaging way of trying to tell the story.
What's interesting, too, about that first one is that it was such a problem production as well, with Doug Liman not working particularly, very well with the producers, and there was a lot of conflict there. And the fact that, when it got that confidence burst on home video, they were like, you know what? We can try to get something out of this. Like, a lot of studios would have been very content to just be like, you know what? That was not a great experience. It did great. We broke even. All's good. Let's move forward with something else. But the fact was they saw that spark there and enough value to continue to go back.
Well, and it's the weird thing about this franchise, isn't it? Where it's like the third movie is kind of like that too, where it's like the screenwriter just basically just like screwed off, like handed in a treatment and then basically just went for a walk.
Yeah.
And they pieced together a movie out of nothing, and the movie's good. It shouldn't be good. They shouldn't have been able to make a good movie out of that, but they did. And it just seems par for the course that, like, even the troubled movies that they make, they can manage to make something that's cool out of it.
And what about you, John? What was your sort of initial connection to the Bourne franchise?
I saw it at the cinema when it came out in 2002, and for me, it was certainly the best action film of that year. I thought Blade 2 was pretty good. Attack of the Clones I quite enjoyed, and I was fairly familiar with the books. Robert Ludlum, I'd got Holcroft Covenant, which then I saw as a film, but it was made earlier. But it was a movie with Michael Caine, and the Osterman Weekend, of course, with Rutger Hauer, which was one of his as well. But again, on the point made there, casting Matt Damon. You go, really, Matt Damon? But he is so impressive. He really is, and has an extraordinary quality on screen of a much, even in the first picture of a much older, experienced actor. He turns up the screen and you can't take your eyes off it. I mean, he really is sensational and continues to get, I think anyway, gets better and better with each movie. So his development of the character, now whether that was directly in connection with Doug Liman, I'm not sure, but certainly his development of the character over time makes it for great viewing. And I personally, if it's not Matt Damon, it's not a Bourne movie.
Sorry, Jeremy Renner.
However, sorry, Jez, but I think that it's tricky to watch anything else that is Bourne orientated, and he's not in it. So I think that we all did the same thing. He's written a movie, he's got an Oscar. He's spent all of his time with Ben Affleck, and if you look at the two careers beside each other, Matt's absolutely soared. And Matt's had his ups and his downs and his sideways and all sorts of but Matt, I think, is terrific, and I think this is a real clincher for him, a real moment where you can see that this is where it started.
It also seems to have helped that it appears that he was hungry for this, because it was not a genre that he was in.
No.
So I think he came into it knowing that he was going to have to prove himself to a certain degree to an audience that might not be accepting of him as an action hero. And because he hadn't done it and wanted to do it, he was really hungry to get in there and nail it.
His versatility, I think, is the key to this, because certainly as we've experienced over time, what he does is he doesn't really mind what the role is. He's quite happy to take something that's a bit left field. He's quite happy to take a comedy. He's quite happy to take a serious role, and still give it 150% and still be the guy who's delivering. He's read this line and this line is funny, and he's going to tell you that it's funny in the on the screen, or in this take he's going to bring you to tears because that's the way he sees it, and he's very, very good at doing that. I think he's terrific. I really do, and I think this is a great example of him making a stand and going, look, and the production team. You've effectively got the two major producers from the Indiana Jones movies going, look, this is our new Harrison Ford, if you will. Look what we did with Harrison. Now look what we're going to do with this guy, and they've sent him on this incredible journey. I think it's brilliant, absolutely fabulous.
It's also a couple years after, Nick Cage has started doing action movies. So the idea of casting serious actors in these types of roles has gained more and more popularity as we've phased out more of the Arnolds and the Sylvester Stallones and the Bruce Willises as the action heroes.
Yeah.
And I think that was one thing they actually had a lot of faith in, was Matt Damon as an actor. What can he do with this character versus we're writing an action figure? Can you please slot in your characteristics and just call it a day? They were actually looking at him at organically building a character from the ground up.
He's not Schwarzenegger. He's not 7 feet across. He's not Stallone. He's not a Van Damme. He's not a Chuck Norris character. He is a very, very good actor. Just on the basis of the fact that he was a very good actor on the basis of this particular product.
I was just going to say, it really feels like the logical endpoint of the entire evolution of the action hero out of the 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s. Because you had, of course, the 80s where you have your Schwarzeneggers and your Stallones, and it's all bodybuilders are basically your action heroes. And people got tired of that, and in the 90s started looking for new forms of that, and it started with Die Hard and Bruce Willis, that it started to become the everyman. And then that's how you end up with Nicolas Cage, of all people, dominating the 90s in the action adventure genre. And it really feels like the logical endpoint of trying to find out who that action hero actually is landing at Jason Bourne. That feels like its final form in a sense.
I was also going to say, just in terms of Matt Damon, I think one of the things he does really well is wears his heart on his sleeve, especially in these films. He's like that wounded animal the whole time, and you feel for the plight that he is going through. And I think that helps that he was more of a character actor and in a lot of dramas before that sort of acting chops came through. And it's something that you can really chart the course with these films a little bit of what was happening in Bond, because obviously when Pierce Brosnan came along, it was the Bond that was more of an emotional Bond, and Pierce didn't get it to go exactly where he wanted it to. Unfortunately, the end wasn't where anyone wanted it to end up. But I think that the Bourne sort of picked up that baton, obviously changed action cinematography and action going forward, but allowed there to be a vulnerability to your lead.
Yes, certainly, and I think it's interesting that they bookend each other. That Pierce's Bond, which came out that year, is invisible cars and tsunamis, and yet Jason Bourne is right in the now. This is covert ops. This is the everyman. This is a guy who finds out that he can do the most extraordinary stuff. Hasn't a single clue how he can do it, but he does it, and he does it really spectacularly well. And you go, wow, this guy that's the Bond that we should have had, So it's interesting that they've taken that and run with it.
Well, speaking of hasn't got a single clue, I'm going to throw over to Cam.
Thank you.
Marvellous link.
Yes, you're welcome.
That was one heck of a segue.
Cam, I asked you to prepare this before, but could you give us like a little bit of a rundown of how the Bourne films did and sort of how we thought about them and the knock list and everything?
Yeah, so the franchise, it's a Universal franchise, has made about $1.6 billion worldwide. And when you break it down by numbers, the most successful was Bourne Ultimatum, which made $444 million, followed by Jason Bourne, which did $416, and then Supremacy, which did $291, followed by Legacy, which did $276, and then last was Bourne Identity with $214. But it was very much like a franchise that really built up, and its big moment was Ultimatum. Now, in terms of the knock list, when we covered them, Bourne Supremacy was the only one we added onto the list. Bourne Identity became very controversial with people. That's the one we've heard the most about since the early days of this podcast. Was about Bourne Identity not quite making it. It came very close, but not quite. And Ultimatum was a battle where we had two guests on that episode, and it was a divided 50-50 battle over that one, which left it kind of just off to the side a little bit. But Jason Bourne and Legacy, no, they didn't make it. Not a lot of arguments there.
Well, I suppose what I want to tackle then before we get to the best, worst, and why is just looking at the franchise and its importance to cinema. So, I kind of mentioned the Bond connection, which I'll get to in a second. But a lot of this film can be found in sort of the Tony Scott editing style that was 90s, noughties. But it's really pushed that forward. But one thing I found quite interesting when I was looking at the timeline, Mission Impossible 3 and Casino Royale came out in 2006. By that point, we had already had Bourne Identity and Bourne Supremacy. And a lot of people will say Mission Impossible 3 is where that franchise figured itself out. And where Bond took a different turn and really, for a lot of people, was emulating a lot of what they saw in Bourne. And just from that angle alone, its importance can't be understated. It has clearly influenced at least two other spy action franchises, let alone action franchises as a whole. But I'll throw it out to everyone else. John, how about you first?
Well, it certainly is. It's important the way that Hitchcock is important, or the way that Bond is important. As you said, Hitch and Bond sort of set standards. You need characters like Bourne to come along and move those goalposts a bit. Be the hero, be the anti-hero, loved by everybody and hated by everybody, and then loved again. They need to be able to do that. I think that you definitely get that in these movies, and coming at everything from different angles is always refreshing. But most importantly, and I think this is key, what you were saying in connection with the fact that you've got Casino and you've got the Mission Impossible movie had come out after the release of these initial movies, as I will probably touch on later on myself, but there's a great deal of intertwining of crew involved in all of this, whether it be second unit director, stunt people, other individuals in the production. And they then move on to other productions like Casino Royale, for instance, like Mission Impossible, and they go, this bit of business that we did here in this movie, that's nice. Can we adapt that for this? And they go, yes, we can, but we'll change it and we'll make it better. And they keep moving stuff around. And so you've got the character which has taken on that mantle of being the most important spy type genre, espionage genre that you then have, because Bond had been doing it. And of course, Bond had a bit of a hiatus and then came back with Casino. And by that time, there's been a lot of work gone into Bourne Identity. It's got great set pieces along the way. People have gone, oh, that's nice. Oh, there's a nice car chase. I want to do something with a car chase. That hasn't been done for a while. And they try and do something in that movie over there. And then they take that fight routine, and that's a clever fight routine. Well, we'll try and move that into the, or something similar, into a Mission Impossible. And they keep moving stuff around. I think Jason Bourne, really, if you look at it on the sort of the scale of things, is right there in the middle, feeding off. There's lots of other productions and lots of other areas of film, of cinema, which are feeding off this character because it's giving out so much. The way that Bond used to do in the 60s and 70s, that was the mantle, and everybody wanted a slice of that pie. Well, I think Bourne is doing a similar exercise in this instance here, and very successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more on that. And, it's interesting when you look at other franchises as well, like Taken. I think it is very much has connective tissue with the Bournes.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not the sequels, but...
No, but there's certainly the fighting style and the editing style, most certainly.
Well, throwing over to you, Ashley, your thoughts on the importance of the Bourne franchise?
Yeah, it's... I think definitely Identity was hugely important, and I think it's because the entire genre had sort of reached this lull moment, and Identity comes along and all of a sudden adds something to the genre that the genre hadn't had for a long time, or even particularly ever, which is this sense of propulsion and kineticism to everything, both like driving the story forward, but also the action that hadn't really been part of these films before. And I think, especially with Casino Royale, you don't get that movie without the Bourne films. And not only, like, especially when you watch like that opening scene in the construction site of Casino Royale, that's like straight up a Bourne scene right there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very easy to see. But I think it's also the element of that the Craig films basically introduced a broken Bond in a way. It's like they focused in on like, here's how he's kind of like not complete as a person, and he's operating out of a sense of having all of these flaws of being this incomplete jigsaw puzzle. And that was never really there before, especially with like the Brosnan films. It was like suave guy who walks in and cleans up the room and doesn't break a sweat.
Yep.
And the Craig films completely changed that. And I don't think you get that without having the Bourne films, which are all entirely centered around the fact that he starts out as a broken character who doesn't know who he is and is struggling against multiple adversaries to find out just what the hell is going on and where his place in the world is. And that's like the central kind of emotional conceit that keeps the Bourne movies in place. And that starts to become a very large part of the entire genre as a whole going forward. You even see that in the Mission Impossible movies to a certain extent. The third movie that comes out, post-Bourne movies, introduces the Michelle Bonan character, which creates like this incredible emotional focal point that even Christopher McQuarrie is going back to and using in the later films as well, to create like, here's this part where he was broken, where he tried to have a real relationship and obviously his job can't handle it, and now he just has to be this incomplete wounded warrior who's like cut off that side of his life, and he can't have that, and therefore he's always going to be lacking. And it the entire genre evolved, I think, not just like in the action scenes, but also in the way we were telling these stories and the types of characters that we were using to tell these stories. And I think that's all due to Bourne Identity.
And what about you, Cam?
I think it's really interesting to look at how the Bourne franchise shaped Hollywood for a couple things. We can look at the spy genre, which I'll get to in a second, but I think you have to also look at, like, the Bourne Identity comes out 1 year after 9/11. And after 9/11, Hollywood was kind of reckoning with how to make action movies anymore. That, the Arnold model wasn't working. And, his, like, what was it? A Collateral Damage came out shortly. Yeah, shortly after 9/11. And it was just like a flop. And it was like the world was not ready to see kind of this sort of, over the top, pumped up action. And one thing I think the Bourne franchise did very well that really tapped the zeitgeist at the time was acknowledging the consequences of violence with its character, where we root for Bourne, but he's also someone who's constantly looking at his past and some of the terrible things he's done. And when people die in the movies, it treats it with weight, whether it's allies of his or even just some of the assets. Like, you never get the sense it's just kind of throwaway violence for the sake of violence. And that's something that I think you would see would shape movies like the Daniel Craig Bond films, as well as, say, the Christopher Nolan Batman films, where it was like, we can't quite do escapist violence the way we used to. The way we do that tends to fall into fantasy, which is why when you look at the years going forward, you had a lot of Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Spider-Man, all that sort of stuff was what really grabbed the mainstream as well in terms of action on screen. Whereas Bourne was sort of your adult thinking kind of franchise where adults could see some moral gray material. They could kind of, it's kind of like thinking person's action movies. It gives you those thrills, but it's also doing it in a way where we're looking at it a little more seriously than I think we really were before 9/11. Now, in terms of the spy genre, I mean, we've talked about how it's shaped so much, but I think what's really interesting is the specific point in time, 2002. The Bond franchise, I don't want to say it's running on fumes because the movies have been very successful. World is not enough. However, yeah. World is not enough. Big, made a lot of money. No one was in love with it. Die Another Day would come out in 2002 and be polarizing at best with people and also kind of falling into the fantasy realm. They were almost like, we better embrace over-the-top cartoony stuff because people don't really want something maybe serious at the moment. It felt like Bourne fought off kind of the people that were trying to take the throne of the spy franchises. You look at Triple X, which came out the same year as the Bourne Identity, and it was kind of remixing the elements of Bond, but kind of giving you the Bond experience. Whereas it felt like Jason Bourne looked at the spy genre and said, we need to shake it up completely. We need to do something, things very differently than what have been seen in the past. You can look at stuff like The Ipcris File, or some of the, more serious, older spy films, but they weren't crowd-pleasing franchises. And they found a way to kind of merge those sensibilities with a franchise and really, draw an audience in and make a lot of people look at the Bourne franchise as the premier important spy franchise of the time. And even when they would be doing things later down the road, like reinventing Bond or Mission Impossible would be coming back in a big way. If you look at criticism of the time, there's a lot of talk about, well, the Bournes are at the top. How do these measure up against those?
It's crazy when you look at it like in the spy genre. I don't think people are measuring up against the Bourne benchmark anymore. I think it had its 3 films perhaps potentially that were its time in the sun.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that for a while, Bond was not the benchmark.
Yeah,
and there isn't many times in history after the 60s that can be said.
Yeah, 60s and 70s. I mean, you couldn't touch them with a barge pole. They were absolutely on their own, and certainly, that early 90s period when the Mission Impossible started coming out, and then you had GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies and World Is Not Enough. I mean, they were kind of trying to hold their own, and they were doing exactly what they said they were going to do. What Bourne does, obviously after Die Another Day, which went in that direction, what you have is very similar characters. Bond works for an organisation, in this instance MI6. Bourne works for an organisation. He doesn't know it, can't remember it, but the Treadstone program, or that whole deal, is, he's being worked, he's being run by an individual, the way that Bond does, from a backroom boys type of outfit. So all of that is relevant. The difference here is that Bond is issued with gadgets, gear, good clothes, all the other bits and pieces, whereas Bourne is constantly on the run. Or he's running in a direction because he's trying to find out about him, not about the villain at the end of the day. That ultimately will sort itself out through the course of these pictures, because there is an individual that is causing all of this issue in the first place that he has to get around to. But they are very much still working in that situation. I was interested in what you were saying there in connection with Bourne not being the benchmark now. Where else do you think where do you think the benchmarks have been since 2016?
It's an interesting question. I think
personally, with the Mission Impossible series,
right. I would say that. Yeah. I would say that a lot of critics and stuff are looking at more of the John Wick films, which are kind of a little bit spy adjacent, and even something like Skyfall, specifically Skyfall.
I mean, I think Casino Royale and Skyfall definitely brought a lot of eyes back to the Bond franchise, but I think it's fair to say that post GoldenEye, there was a diminishing interest in some quarters of what Bond was offering, because it wasn't really evolving. It was that good old thing that everyone likes watching. It's the nostalgia blanket feeling, which is fine and it works, but it took Casino Royale to really change that.
There's one element about these films that no one ever talks about that I think is fascinating, and I think you kind of hit on it a bit, where you're talking about how a lot of the other films that were succeeding in the marketplace at the time were playing to over the top, cartoony, big, larger than life, entertaining, the Spider-Mans, whatnot, coming out of 9/11. And the one element of these films that is consistent throughout is the bureaucracy of it and the mundaneness. We spend an awful lot of time in command centers with people in front of computers who are being barked at to type faster. We see shoe leathery stuff of just trying to tap into someone's phone and finding out what phone they're going to be on, or triangulating where they are in the world, that sort of thing, so we can get an asset up and get them over to there as we watch on a big screen in a darkened room filled with smoke. And it's done in such a way that it isn't stupid computer stuff, if you know what I mean. When you have a lot of technology or lingo that gets displayed in a movie, sometimes they will make it really stupid for the audience that needs to have their hand held. These movies never do that. They don't care if you're tracking everything everyone is saying in those conversations. Just as long as you get the gist of what's going on, you'll keep up, and you'll they're after Bourne, that's all I need to know, and they've sort of locked on to him. I've got enough information. But if you're following everything that's being said, there's just a bunch of people doing their jobs, and it's incredibly mundane. And a lot of these movies are centered entirely around that bureaucracy inside the CIA, and treated in a very ultra realistic manner, not in the way that you would see in something like Bad Company, which makes it flashy. It's not the way Michael Bay would present it, where it's over the top, and you can see the computer screens so bright that they're reflecting off people's faces and stuff like that. It's not heightened. It's played realer than real. And that was something that was unique to these movies that they brought to the genre at that time.
Well, bouncing off of that, it's something that actually has just occurred to me. I can't pretend it's some sort of deep thought I've had for years. But when we're talking about spy movies, and Cam and I have been doing this for close to 2 years now, there seems to be two camps. There's the action adventures, and then the serious spy stories. And there's a few that walk the line, and then there's the comedies and things like that. But these Bourne films seem to walk that line between them beautifully, because they are procedurals. That you are watching the shoe leather, as you say, Ashley, and but you're also watching the action adventure stuff of Bourne kicking butt. And it manages to blend them both perfectly. So if you're ever looking for a sort of a spy movie that ticks all of the spy boxes, perhaps Bourne is your destination.
Oh, maybe so. I mean, 30 plus years ago, if you had a similar type of movie that was that would be, a villain with a purpose, and that purpose would be to send this rocket to that country and blow it up, or it would be to take this particular piece of equipment, which was absolutely essential, to put into another invention that he created that would cause world domination or something. Whereas here, it's a pen drive, or it's a photograph, it's a scrap of paper, it's something that allows Bourne to move on to that next part, or to meet somebody who will then give him some form of recollection, and move on to that next section. It is fascinating the way that those scenes that are in the offices surrounded by the computer screens are as exciting as the physical action that you're seeing elsewhere.
Well, there's a lot of zooming and enhancing.
Oh yeah.
But speaking of moving on to the next section, I'm doing good connective tissue here today. I quite like it.
We're bowing to you, Scott.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It's top rate work.
I've had a lot of coffee.
Loving your links, dude. Loving your links.
Now, one of the things I set you both a teeny bit of homework, which was just to have a little think about the Bourne franchise in terms of your area of expertise. So I'm going to throw it to both of you. I'll probably go to Ashley first, just in terms of editing, film, and sort of the connective tissue between that and the Bourne franchise and what it did for cinema at that time.
Yeah, I think I'm going to jump to the sequels for this one, because I think you really kind of get to the actual identity of the aesthetic of the Bourne films once Paul Greengrass picks up the films. He basically creates like the visual language for what these films are, and what other people attempt to often badly replicate in other films. And there's something about Greengrass where he is able to get so much coverage and shoot it in such a chaotic way, with the camera constantly moving and very quick, heavy cutting, but you don't actually get lost. And he is one of the few filmmakers that can actually accomplish this. Everyone else who tries this, it usually ends up like a horrible mess. But his films, and I know there's a lot of people who complain about like how quickly they're cut or how much the camera is moving, but I never found it a problem with these films. In fact, I considered it a benefit. I think it's a wonderful aesthetic that he creates, and he seems to be unique at being able to do that. There was, I think it was in Ultimatum, no, it was in Supremacy. There's one scene, I went through it because I was just like watching specifically the editing, where the entire scene is just Jason Bourne goes to an internet cafe and does research on the internet to get a name and then leaves.
Yes.
Whole scene is like a minute 30. Not a very quick scene. Not a lot happening. Dude walks into a cafe, sits down, looks at a computer, pulls something up, writes down a name, leaves. This could be something you could do in 5-6 shots. The scene itself had 49 cuts in it. It was absolutely crazy. The camera's zooming in on parts of the screen, cutting to close-up of Bourne. There are shots where it's a close-up of Bourne looking at the screen that cuts to another shot of Bourne looking at the screen. There's a cut to the same shot. This should not work. In terms of editing, this is something you don't do. This is like a bad edit, but it works. And it comes back to what I was talking about the propulsiveness and the kineticism that these films bring. And so you have this incredibly mundane scene of he sits down and looks at a computer, but the way in which it's shot and the way in which it has been edited, which are both working in tandem. You have to have both those hand in glove, or this does not work. You can't have just one department deciding they're going to go off on this journey and the other one's like, well, let's play it straight. Doesn't work. So in conjunction, both of these departments are coming together to add this incredible intensity to an horribly mundane scene that honestly, if it were filmed straight, you'd be like, why was it even in there? That was the most boring shit ever. And instead, it's kind of riveting, and you're only catching those little fragments of what's going on, but it's enough to say, okay, I get what we're doing now. Even if I didn't see everything, I'm feeling it. And the way in which it's delivered with such a propulsion that I'm amped for whatever we're going into. And that's kind of the language that these films have done, especially from an editing level. And I think it's I don't think there's really quite anything else that are like them.
In theory, like a sequence like that of him at the computer could be the equivalent of like the Liam Neeson jumping over the fence in Taken 3, where it's like a laughing stock, but it's like in practice, filtered through green grass and just like given a propulsive style. It actually connects hardwires right to the emotion of the viewer. Like you're actually involved in the experience versus standing there passively being like, well, that looks garbage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that fence jumping scene is a great example of not just like, I don't want to call it out as bad editing, but I show that clip to clients who complain that I've cut something too quickly, and I just send them the Liam Neeson jumping a fence scene, and after that they're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, you're good. And they back off immediately. But also just from like what we think of when we think of like bad editing in fight scenes, it's typically to cover for actors who aren't capable of doing the fighting enough, did not have enough prep time to learn the fighting.
Yep.
Like you only get the Matrix because they train for 6 months beforehand.
Oh, sure.
And most movies do not have that type of lead time going into a movie. So unless you have an actor who has already been trained in fighting, like if you have Keanu Reeves on a film already, now, then you've already got a trained fighter that you've cast in your film. That's not always the case. And especially when you're doing stuff like TV, schedules are so freaking tight. You just go into it and you do the best you can. You shoot lots of coverage and you fix it in editing by having to cut a lot on usually every swing and every impact. And you end up with the exact same thing as Liam Neeson jumping a fence, because he's like, at that point, what, like a 70-year-old man, and he's like running and scaling a fence. I guarantee you it was not that quick, him climbing a fence. And their way around that to make it look like he was doing a lot of action really fast was to just cut it up into 10 different shots with a lot of coverage. And that's the same thing you get with like action that does not, or fight scenes that does not look great.
Well, it's interesting because I've been doing setups for the last couple of in-between bits, but you've just set me up perfectly, Ashley, to ask Jon what he thinks the Bourne sort of franchise's impact has been on action and stunt work and things like that.
I'm probably going to have to touch on each of the films as I go along, but I mean, for years the argument was that Bond films had changed because of the way Bourne action was depicted and filmed, and the truth is that the people who created the action for both are in fact the same individuals. I'll get to that later on, but the concept of the car chase or the fight hasn't really changed very much, but it's the ingenious way that they come up with this new slant. So if you look at Bourne Identity, which has two major set pieces in it, you've got the car chase firstly, and you've got the fight in the apartment, the car chase. Well, the stunt coordinator is a guy called Nick Powell, and his fight choreographer for the film was Nicky. And of course, you're going to be speaking to Nicky, aren't you? Or you've got an episode with Nicky. The two of them, what you were talking about there a moment ago in connection with the fighting and editing, is that quite right, that the actor maybe hasn't had the same amount of time that they should have done in order to get this done correctly. So what's happening is that obviously fights are incredibly boring in certain cases to watch two blokes throwing haymakers at each other, but this idea is to come at it from a different level, disabling the opponent with as many moves as possible using whatever he finds around the flat. Now in this case it's a pen, and to convince the audience with the help of the editor that this is doable is incredibly great fun to watch. And also, Matt Damon is incredibly good in this fight, but for this particular fight, wasn't there enough maybe to pick up on some of those moves that Nicky was trying to throw into the fight, and so there are a great deal more edits from further away instead of having those close-ups of the actors going at it. A big French team involved here, because obviously what they did in the later pictures was they took European and American and UK stunt teams and put them all together. Well, here we're filming in France, we'll use a French team. Now, ideally for the car chase, because the everything reverts back to Bond. Well, the car chase coordinator is a guy called Jean-Claude Laguinet, who was the car chase coordinator, part of Remy Julien's team, who provided the action on a number of the Bond films, one of which, of course, was A View to a Kill in Paris for Roger Moore. And he's the guy who doubles Roger when the car gets split in two during that chase.
You never notice. You never notice that stunt double.
He's uncanny, isn't he? And the Mini is perfect for those narrow streets. Again, I think maybe they're trying to look at something from the Italian Job: down staircases, tight turns. But Supremacy changes tact, so they bring in bigger guns. Not that the French aren't big guns, but this production has got bigger based on the success of the previous one. They bring Dan Bradley in as second unit director and coordinator. Now, is one of the guys responsible for the action on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, for instance. Lawn Mower Man was one of his. Panic Room. Second unit director on Quantum of Solace as well. So and Spider-Man 2, which gave him a great deal of work with wires and the sort of early stage CGI, which the Bourne movies take. They take a great deal of use of wire work later on, and particularly in this, because there's a fabulous foot chase in this, and Matt Damon jumping off a bridge, doing it for real. The way that later on, when Daniel Craig took over as Bond, that was the motto. Let's, bring Bond back to let's get him actually doing it for real on stage. Well, that's what they do here. He also brings with him his assistant coordinator from Spider-Man, Darren Prescott, in as the second unit stunt coordinator, and a new fight guy called Jeff Amada, who's choreographer with Damon Caro, another very good fight guy. Damon's got a Hong Kong background, and these four pretty much change the way that action fights are planned and executed. Jeff Amada brings a new style. It's a Filipino Kali, which an incredibly quick style, very aggressive style of fighting, which allows Bourne to use more props, in this instance a magazine. And again, another car chase, this one pushing the bar even higher this time with the kind of destruction that we'd only seen before in movies like The French Connection or Ronin. These impacts are unbelievable. They really are, and they are continually pushing the boundaries of having, firstly, Matt Damon in the car for a number of those impacts for real, but also having it on a rig and having a camera in and having a plate by him so they can spin the car violently. Ultimatum, same type of elements, but cranked up to 11. Can I use a Spinal Tap reference yet? There we go, I've done it.
Go for it.
Cranked up to 11. And Bourne Ultimatum, technically, is Bourne free, if you're a Cockney. Dan Bradley, again, at the helm, but Gary Powell, who's then the coordinator on the 4 Bond films that had Daniel Craig, and again, pushing the boundaries, particularly in Tangier, and that sequence there where you get Lee Morrison brought in to double Matt on the motorcycle, Lee Morrison then going on to coordinate No Time to Die, because he was a professional motocross rider before he became a stunt performer. And the foot chase is the key thing. That moment where Bourne leaves the roof and goes through the window and the camera goes with him. And that originally, they were using zip wires. They were using wire cams to get a great many of those rooftop shots. But they found that technically the speed of the camera was overtaking David Leitch, who was the stunt double for Matt Damon in The Roof Jump. David Leitch, of course, now full-time director, Deadpool 2, Atomic Blonde, John Wick, Fast and Furious, Hobbs and Shaw. He's the director behind this, started as a stuntman. The wire cam is travelling faster than he is. So Gary said to Diz Sharp, who's one of the stunt guys, would you be the cameraman? Yeah, okay. So he has to literally go with him and jump with him. And that shot that's the most played shot from that movie anywhere. And of course, a lot of the guys who worked on that all took it and did the rooftop chase in Quantum of Solace. Legacy changes direction. And I don't really understand why. Dan Bradley, again, as second unit director. And it's almost as though he said in this instance, we'll let the cast do as much as they possibly can without us having to do as many physical stunts. And Jeremy Renner, for in comparison, what he brings to the role, although he's a different element to this whole story, what he does bring is the fact that he's a really serious motorcyclist, and that motorcycle chase in that picture, a huge proportion of it is him, and that does make. And he's doubled once or twice. That slide down the stairs, for instance, on the bike.
Was the part where he fell asleep on the motorcycle also him?
Yes, the part where he falls asleep because he's not concentrated because he's tired. Yes, that. Yes. And saying, "Is it over yet? And can I go home, please?"
I have to work on my app.
Yes, I'm really not bothered about this picture anymore.
I love how he does all the motorcycle stuff for that, and then he breaks both his arms on a movie called Tag.
Yes.
Yeah, in a freak beanbag accident. Yeah, exactly.
The worst kind.
It is weird, isn't it? But that was the one thing that Dan Bradley realised. He said, we do a lot of testing with Matt. We put Matt in a car, or we put him on a motorcycle, and we say, "Can you do this?" And you say to an actor, "Can you ride a horse?" "Oh yeah, I can ride a horse." And they get on the horse, and the horse's head is behind them, and they're facing the wrong direction. And they go, "You can't. You've never ridden a horse in your life, have you?" "No, I'm sorry, I haven't." Say that to Matt Damon. He can drive a car. He's very good at driving cars. But when Dan Bradley said, as soon as we put Jeremy Renner on a bike, you automatically know, we are good. So a great deal of that stuff is fantastic. But I just think it lacks something that they then try and replace with Jason Bourne. Opening with that fight with the one punch, and that's it, game over. They bring in a different coordinator now with Simon Crane, the second unit director, and Gary Powell coming in for coordinating. And the two of them have worked together for years. Gary was Simon's right-hand man for many years on pictures like Titanic and GoldenEye, for instance. So all of these elements, you put everything together, and then they arrive at the most extraordinary car chase down the Vegas Strip. And they just pile on through it, and really do change the aspect of action. And those movies, I think, on themselves, if you put them all together, creating that carnage and making it look that good. And it's mesmerizing, it really is. It's the way that probably Bond was during those early periods, through that early part of the 60s, where you had the phenomena and people going, wow, this is amazing. Well, this series of movies has certainly pushed that. And on the strength of the success of that, Tom Cruise pushes the boundaries just a bit every time. And it's all one-upmanship. Where it'll end, I don't know.
It's interesting because I think sometimes we tend to get a bit siloed when we're talking about a film franchise and not really contextualize it in a time and place. But, when you paint a picture that way and say how that these teams were sort of interconnected with the other franchises, and it was more like a collage of action films all working together and growing, you can really see that, actually, and especially if you chart it against other films coming out at the time. I imagine a lot of these teams working on these films, talking to each other and coming up with ideas, collaborating with each other. It's actually a different angle I'd never really looked at it from, but yeah, I can definitely see how that has, because we said earlier how Casino Royale took notes from Bourne, but maybe it wasn't that then. Maybe it was more of a case of they looked and thought, well, let's talk to those people, and they worked together.
I think a lot of that is the case. I think that interconnecting between groups of individuals or somebody that is very, very familiar here. We want to do this. This is what we want to do. Well, what does it say on the page? Well, it says this, this, and this. That's the shots we're trying to get. Well, have you thought about doing it like this? No, because I was going to do this. And they work it out together.
It's a little bit kind of like the ragtag team that made Star Wars, the original Star Wars, how they filtered out and completely changed their industry and worked on a lot of movies that then people said, well, look, they're trying to rip off Star Wars.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, we were the people that did that. Exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
That's the whole point.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Calling all agents. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a top secret volcano lair. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right. As you may know, we've activated the Spy Hearts Patreon, home of our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors and full film commentaries with more intel than a Basil exposition briefing.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
Well, Scott, calling the Avengers, and I'm not talking about Cap and Hawkeye. I'm talking about Emma Peel and John Steed, because we are going to do a commentary on 1998's The Avengers. Get into your teddy bear suit, people.
And if that sounds delicious, then become a true spy hard today and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, Cam, resume the spy jinx. Right, well, next up on our round tables, what we'd like to do is something called the best, worst, and why. Now, we're not talking about Bond this time, so I've changed the topics. But I had some notes last time we did this. We should have an order picked out so it's not confusing. So what we're going to do is every topic will either start with Ashley or John, and we'll rotate each time. And then we'll snake our way back down to best, worst, and back up again. Well, first up on the best, worst, and why, we have the best assets. Now, this is someone, a Treadstone agent or a Larks agent. But I want to know your best and your worst and why. So best first, let's go with Ashley.
Okay, best asset. I'm going to have to go with the Professor because simply Clive Owen. I love Clive Owen.
Look at the guy.
Also, his regular day job when he's not activated, he's like, teaching piano to kids?
Yeah.
That's what Blofeld did, too.
Like, I've always wondered about the logistics of that. It's like, okay, so does he only get paid when he's activated on assignment, and that's when he collects his CIA paycheck, and the rest of the time he's having to make do with piano lessons? Or is the only reason he can do the piano lessons as a career and actually live is because he's getting paid by the CIA, and that's where all his funding comes from? Probably the latter. But it's like, this is a little rabbit hole my brain goes down whenever I see him. He's like, I'm at a piano lesson with a child. Oh, time to go murder Jason Bourne. I kind of love the dichotomy of that. The idea that there's just all of these people out there leading incredibly mundane lives, and suddenly now time to go be a hired assassin. And I think that's kind of amazing. And also just that whole kind of cat and mouse on the farm between him and Bourne at the end of the first film, I think is legitimately thrilling, where they're both trying to get line of sight on each other. And I think that's just a great scene overall. I really dig that.
Well, firstly, I can't shake the image of the Professor just getting really frustrated with one of his students not hitting the an A7th chord and just sod it. I'm killing this kid. That's it.
He pulls out a 45 and I said B flat, kid.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
Well, okay, so we've got one vote for the Professor. John, what about you?
What for asset? I'm looking at this from a different point of view, obviously, but Vincent Cassel's asset for me is just fabulous. I think he's the best of the bunch. He's a superb actor at the best of times. He's also a professional fighter as well. So he's very convincing in those roles, and he's just relentless. I mean, he's absolutely relentless. I was watching some of the behind the scenes stuff of the fights that they were creating in that storm drain at the end of the picture, and he is just throwing the kitchen sink at himself just to get himself into some sort of mental position to go, right, I'm ready to do this now. And then Matt Damon starts to do the same thing where they're banging against walls and, doing this thing. They're just trying to get them, and then hitting each other, and then they go into the fight. They're all keyed up, and I think he's absolutely superb. Whenever I see him in any movie, I go, here he comes. And you tend to, for me anyway, I look at him and go, yeah, all right, I'm perfectly happy. I know that something appalling is going to happen to somebody in a moment, and he's likely to either be the instigator behind it, or he's going to get it himself, one or the other. But it doesn't. When you see him on screen, you know that you're in for a good time, and he's terrific. He's very good.
I can't shake the image of Matt Damon and Vincent Cassel smashing their heads against the wall to get ramped up for a fight. Now
I know,
Thank you
right?
for that sounds pretty good. What, Cam? Who's your asset?
I went with the Professor as well. I think he just does a fantastic job setting the template. He feels different, that there's more of an intellectual side, whereas Bond henchmen were always sort of, your Jaws, your odd jobs, whereas the Professor, dude in glasses, very good-looking actor, very dignified, and he has that line of dialogue of, look what they make us give, which then echoes back throughout the franchise. So I think Professor's the most interesting one and the one they model all future assets on.
I'm actually going to split the vote. I actually was going to go for the asset from Jason Bourne, Vincent Cassel. I just like that he's like the closest to taking Bourne down out of all of them, and he's the longest serving of any of these brainwashed agents. He's actually longer serving than Jason Bourne. I think there's a lot of stuff you could have dug into there. I don't think Jason Bourne, the film, really digs into it as much as it should. But he's one of the only people in the entire series that actually has Bourne on the ropes. So I quite like that.
Yeah.
Going back the other way, I will say my worst first.
Okay.
I have... Well, he doesn't have a name. He's Larks03 from the Bourne Legacy, played by Louise Ozawa Changchien, I believe that's how you pronounce the name. So good, they couldn't think of a name for the guy, and he gets offed very quickly by Aaron Cross. So if Aaron Cross can beat you,
What Larks? I mean, he sounds like a... He sounds like an 80s synthesizer, doesn't he? I'd like the Larks.
Piano, though.
Or a piano lesson, yes, or a cigarette. Yeah.
Cam?
I had the same one, Larks03. It's like nothing against the performer. It's just like he's kind of an afterthought. They call in Larks like near the end of the movie. They're like, oh, we don't have an asset. Crap, we better call one in. There he is. And he doesn't really have any personality. I don't even remember how he dies, and, he's just very forgettable.
So we have 2 for Larks. John, what have you got?
Well, and again, but from a different point of view, but based on what was earlier, it might be Clive Owen's character because of his flexibility.
Because he's a part-time worker, is that what it is? You just don't like it.
They bring this guy in. They haven't even got somebody who's full-time, who's continual. I know that their entire purpose is to blend in and not be seen, be that invisible character. But for him to be very publicly, a teacher of children primarily, and to teach piano and to do all of that, and then to get a message to say you need to be at so and so because you need to kill so and so. Well, same time next week? No, not next week. No. Maybe Tuesday? Can we do Tuesday? Wednesday better. Maybe I can't do. And all of these different logistical issues that come with trying to balance 2 jobs. I'm not quite sure. It's a good job he's self-employed, I would imagine, doing this this tutoring on the side. But it's not really the worst of him. But I just, now that seed's been planted, I can't see anything else. So on the strength of that,
fair.
I'm going to say him.
They didn't do their DBS checks on the Professor, I think. Yeah, the insurance company did not do their due diligence. But Ashley, bring us home. Who is your worst asset?
I have completely ruined Bourne Identity for John.
Completely. I won't be able to see it again.
Happy 20th anniversary, Bourne Identity.
I think I'm gonna have to sweep the board and say it's Lark 3. It's very much just like a plot contrivance that this guy is even in the film. It's like, oh well, we've gotten to this certain point. We need to escalate things before the end. I know, bring in the super soldier, and the character has no personality. He has no real need to be there. He doesn't add anything to the film. Again, nothing against the performer. He's fine, but it's a nothing character and nothing really comes of it in the film. And so it's just like why is it even there?
Yeah.
And how it gets introduced is so goofy. It's like, oh, well, we just went through this big to-do where we had to basically suicide everyone in this program just in case some journalist connects some dots and find out that it exists. So let's preemptively get ahead of this and just completely like clear the board. All these people now dead. By the way, we have another operation up and running where we have a super Bourne. You weren't worried about that? I don't know. It makes no sense at all.
I remain steadfast in my opinion that to really appreciate Bourne Legacy, you have to take some chems. I'll leave that there.
Well, you do hear a lot about chems.
Yes. Blue, green, red, they've got them all. So it looks like it's a joint best for the Professor and the Asset, and Lark 03 is bringing up the rear. Over to antagonists. Now, this we've classified as people like Ward Abbott, Pam Landy. They're the people that are trying to get Bourne but aren't necessarily out on the streets fighting the man himself. They're usually in the office saying something like, Jesus Christ, it's Jason Bourne. So we're going to go over to John.
Well, my favourite, really, I think, is Abbott. If anything, primarily for that line that he delivers, which I think is spectacular. He says, "You're in a big puddle of shit, Pamela, and you don't have the shoes for it," which I think is wonderful. I love that line. Whoever came up with that line is okay with me. I don't care what he does in the rest of the picture, but that was just beautiful. And you could see that Brian Cox was just eating the furniture, wasn't he? He was just loving it. It's a very the character's many layers to it as a character, but he really does like to turn everything round on a sixpence. You know, when he kills that guy in the steps of the kills him there and then on the spot, takes him downstairs to go and see where the charge went off. And kills him there, just, you know, and all of a sudden you go, you know, because maybe I hadn't realised it beforehand, but that was the moment when he's happy to tell everybody, yep, just in case you didn't know, I'm a bastard. He'll have that, and then goes off, you know. And I think he really does enjoy it enormously. So he's definitely my favourite, I think.
There's a lot of people in these films that are out to get Bourne because it's their job, but Brian Cox just seems like an actual evil person in these films. And so, I completely understand
brilliantly
that.
Cast, exactly.
Absolutely. Ashley, who do you have?
I just want to say real quick that Brian Cox is one of those actors that you can hand this like giant soup of run-on sentences to, and he will turn it into absolute poetry.
Oh, certainly.
It's like, the man is such a great actor. Like, when he just like gets wound up, I freaking love that. Yeah. However, my choice for best antagonist is actually going to be Noah Vossen, played by David Strathairn. And I would almost go with Brian Cox's character because I do love him as a performer and I think he's so good in these films. But I think just as an antagonist in the third film, I think he comes across as this perfect intersection of kind of just outright evil, and he's a company man, and he's a true believer, and he's dedicated to the cause, and he is going to make sure that he is in a position where if anyone goes down, it's going to be the person who's under him and not him, because he's a survivor in this industry that does not like people like him. And I think he plays that so well. He is such a bastard of a character. in the third film, and creating this sort of dichotomy where you have the Pam Landy character basically squaring off against him, which makes her a bit of an ally. And I think it is so interesting, and I've always loved David Strathairn as an actor, and I think he really shines in this.
I'm going to pick John's pick. I'm going to go for Ward Abbott. Brian Cox, I think he's just devious, snaky. I like that. I can't stand the guy. You know he's a villain. Cam, what have you got?
Well, snaky is the operative word for me. I went with Conklin, actually, played by Chris Cooper in The Bourne Identity, who I think has so much reptilian menace and kind of hangs over the entire initial trilogy. And I think just an actor like Chris Cooper could play the devil, and you'd buy it. He has that sort of sinister, seductive style, and I think he kind of sets the template for me for Bourne adversaries.
And you've kind of got that sweaty man thing yourself.
100%. 100%.
Stuff in common there. But going back the other way, Cam, who have you got for worst?
The worst I had was Robert Dewey, played by Tommy Lee Jones in Jason Bourne. Again, Tommy Lee Jones has a lot of gravitas, but I don't buy Tommy Lee Jones asking people about social media accounts.
It's all about your reach.
I mean, you could make a comedy about Tommy Lee Jones, Clint Eastwood, and Kevin Costner opening a social media company, and that would be hilarious. Like, it's just ridiculous.
As long as De Niro's playing the intern.
I wonder what his clout score is.
I'm going to... Yes, I'm going to agree. Robert Dewey is my man. I don't think he knows anything about algorithms or reach. So that's that. 2 votes for TLJ. I believe Ashley is next.
3 for 3. I'm gonna go with Tommy Lee Jones and Jason Bourne. And it's not even just so much that I don't buy that the old man cares about social media, even though I don't buy that the old man cares about social media. But I don't think he's that interesting of a character. I think Tommy Lee Jones looks like he's sleeping through the entire movie. He does not look like he wants to be there at all. He's very much going through the motions. And it all reaches to a head when it gets to this point near the climax of the film where I'm supposed to buy that the CIA director is going to a tech bro conference to be on stage with a panel about social media privacy. He cleared his day for that. I guess there wasn't a war going on anywhere, so I don't buy that for a second. I don't know what the hell he's doing in this movie.
And John.
Well, I can't really disagree with that. My issue is that Tommy Lee Jones has just played Tommy Lee Jones for about 30 years. He hasn't really played a character. All of these are Tommy Lee Jones, But so I suppose from that point of view, I have to agree with everyone that he's the one that is probably bottom of the list. I would like to do an honourable mention, though, if I would, for somebody who's equally as pointless possibly, is Keith Urban. His character doesn't really.
Wait, Keith
seem
Urban.
You mean
Carl
Carl
Urban.
Urban?
Keith Urban's the country
Urban,
singer.
I was going to say Keith Urban. Yeah, didn't he sing something? I just wanted to mention Keith Urban, not Carl
Most
Urban.
musical asset.
Keith Urban, yes. He's got an album out. No. Yes, Carl Urban doesn't really seem to do a great deal apart from, get himself all psyched up and then get killed. I mean, it's not, he's one of those characters that go, right, go and get so-and-so. Right, and off he goes, and then really disappointingly very quickly gets disposed of. So from that point of view, he's probably the worst of the worst. But yes, I'll say I'll go with Tommy Lee Jones as the first choice.
I don't know. I make the same miserable face when I'm in a nightclub too.
Yeah.
Next up, it's Ally. Very important part of the Bourne franchise. It's the people that keep him going, that are on his side. There aren't many of them. We'll go to Ashley first.
Absolutely, I'm going to have to go with Marie, and that's because of my undying love of Franco Potente. I saw Run Lola Run opening day in theaters. It was absolutely so blown away. I went to see it again the next night, and I've just been in love with her ever since. It's like a shame we haven't gotten more big performances from her. But I found really interesting, like they were clearly trafficking off of that with the Bourne Identity, because even when the trailers came out for it, they were using the music from Run Lola Run for the trailer. So they're clearly
Right.
trafficking on people's familiarity with that.
Mm.
But I think she's for especially the first film and for a little bit of the second film until she basically gets French. She is the heart and moral center of the film, and even continues to be in the way that, like, John Wick's dead wife is through all those films. Even though she has no actual presence in the John Wick film, she remains an emotional core to the character that drives him forward. And the same way in the Bourne films. It's like, even when Franca Potente is not there, she is there.
I still think that we were robbed of more.
Yeah.
Her getting off in
Absolutely.
Supremacy is too early. It's a silly choice. It always rubs me the wrong way when I rewatch the film. John, what about you?
I couldn't agree more. It's the moment I saw Marie there in the consulate, arguing with the dude behind the counter. I thought she was fabulous, and she continued that. And again, we've touched on this whole thing about intertwining sequences and bits and pieces, and her death sequence. Oh my God, terrible! And it's just this whole it's Casino Royale all over again. It's that she's drifting away and it's underwater and she's drowned and it's just horrible. One thing I will say, which we haven't really mentioned at any point, I'm going to big up another music star now. I think Keith Urban's had his day. I'm going to say that. I'm not going to mention him again, but I am going to mention John Powell, whose music is absolutely superb. Since re-watching these pictures, I've downloaded a lot of his scores for these, and they're sensational. That opening stuff for Goa and the stuff for Supremacy is marvelous, really very good. So the music in that sequence, coupled with the events of that sequence and losing Marie, and I felt gutted that she'd gone, because I thought there was certainly. There was more distance that could have gone with that, but they cut it short, which was such a shame. But she was terrific. I really enjoyed that.
Cam, what about you?
Well, I have a controversial one that I maybe need permission from the panel to see if this even applies.
What's he doing?
No.
Oh no!
Because
Pull up, Cam.
I think I could make a strong argument that my favorite ally is Pam Landy in Bourne Ultimatum.
Oh,
I'll allow it.
Okay.
I will allow it because it's also my choice.
Is it?
Oh, wow. Because, Pam Landy is obviously an antagonist in Supremacy, but also an antagonist who's been kind of misled and is figuring things out as she goes. So it's really a origin story for your ally about how they came to be on Bourne's side. So when you get to Ultimatum, she's often, giving him information and working along to help him at the end, and is the one to essentially take down Noah Vossen. And it seemed like maybe Pam didn't have the happiest of results, taken from just the snippet you see in Legacy of Noah Vossen apparently going after her for treason. But nonetheless, I think Joan Allen is such a compelling character, and I love how much of an arc she has over multiple films.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're going to allow it. It's also my choice. So that's a split vote for the two strongest allies in this franchise, but I'm glad it was both women. As for worst, John, take us away.
Worst? Well, I don't know. It's worst, but not necessarily worst as far as the picture was concerned. But I'm going to mention Legacy, and it's Daniel Craig's wife, which I don't know. There's something. I think she just gets. I tell you what it was. If I'm comparing Marie, I was with Marie the whole time, and I'm with Nikki to a certain extent. Because I think that she gives her life for Bourne. She makes that decision. I believe anyway. At the end of that picture, whereas Marie, I don't even know her character's name. That's how much interest I took in her. To be fair with you,
Dr. Marta Shearing.
Dr. Marta. There we are. I don't know. I don't think that she's as compelling. She certainly didn't make me. Start rooting for her, even in those moments where she's in that she's in the laboratory and she's hiding from the gunman. Even in those moments, I wasn't really rooting for her, and I'm not entirely certain that on the strength of that, she would fall into any other category apart from, not worst, but least best, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think that would be. It's not necessarily her performance either. So I thought she was really rather good as from an acting perspective, but I think it's just the character maybe wasn't as rounded, or maybe wasn't as developed enough that allowed it to then spill out into the audience and go with it. So I think she's the one that's going to get my vote there.
I think that's fair.
The most interesting aspect of that character is that she's the target of the movie versus the other ones where Jason Bourne is more the target. Yeah. That's a little interesting, but I mean, I think, look, audiences weren't weeping. They didn't get a legacy follow-up. No. So,
What are you talking about? Give it to me, Cam. Give it to me.
That's the chems talking.
I need more pills. That's the chems. It's all about the chems. Ashley, what have you got?
I'm gonna go with Heather Lee, played by Alicia Vikander from Jason Bourne.
Okay.
And you can argue whether or not she's actually an ally, because it kind of gets revealed at the end that she's trying to play him just like everyone else in the agency is. But she has this moment where she basically, much like Pam Landy, kind of breaks away, is this is not what I signed up for. We're doing some really evil shit, and this is not what I believed in when I got into this type of work. And she starts aiding and assisting Bourne. She's just not that interesting of a character, and honestly I found her character mostly annoying throughout the entire film, and wanted to get out of every scene that she was in. And that's nothing against Alicia, she does a great job, but it was just the character, and the general overall story of that film, which I don't think particularly works. So yeah, that's my vote for worst ally.
I don't think she's given a lot to work with. I had a split vote between both of your picks, funnily enough. But I think Alicia Vikander has a stronger performance in the film. I don't think either of them are given great material.
Mm.
So I'm going to say, for worst, it is Rachel Weisz as Dr. Marta Shearing. Cam?
I had a little bit of a split. I'm giving my vote to Heather Lee, but I did consider Nikki, who I think the series is kind of hit or miss with, where she often gets very little to do. And the fact that they basically just kind of repeat the Marie death with Nikki at the start of Jason Bourne, I think is pretty much unforgivable. So in terms of treatment of a character, Nikki would probably take the prize, but I think she's memorable. When I think of the Bourne franchise, I do think of Nikki. Whereas Heather Lee, Ashley, you kind of summed it up, where you just have a hard time caring about that character. And I think it's because her motivations are so murky that even when you finish the movie, you're like, okay, I guess she was a helper, but also, kind of wanted to manipulate him. There's something interesting maybe from the angle of someone who's a millennial CIA operative, dealing with a Gen X, agent with Bourne. There's a generational thing that's kind of interesting they could work with, but it feels like the character's so lost in this sort of mess of conflicting motivations that I walk out just kind of shrugging. And Alicia Vikander, great actress, Oscar winner, not given the best of material here.
Cam, she's our people.
That's right.
Whatever that meant. But it looks like, by the sounds of it, Dr. Shearing's taking it away. Sorry, Rachel Weisz. We love you. Now, the next sequence we have is chase scenes, fights, the best action moments that the Bourne franchise has to offer. So I'm going to throw it to Ashley first.
This one, there's so many great action scenes in this franchise, but hands down, the car chase through Russian traffic at the end of Supremacy, it is probably the best car chase I've seen committed to film. John, earlier you were talking about the kind of stepping stones through the stunt professionals that got up to that moment, and that car chase always seemed to me like it was an evolution out of Ronin, because in that film, one of the big things they did is okay, let's outfit these cars so that we have professional stunt driver driving from the back seat,
Yeah.
and then we can stick De Niro in, or no, it was in the passenger side with the
Yes.
Yeah.
with the stunt driver, and then we can stick Robert De Niro in the driver's seat, and it looks like he's doing all the stunt driving. We can film it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Supremacy takes it a step further and says, you know what? Why don't we put the stunt driver on the top of the car, and then we can mount cameras all around the car, and it looks like Matt Damon's alone in a car driving. And it works so good. And it's so kinetic, it's so propulsive, it's cut so rapidly that the first time you watch the scene, it's hard to grasp everything that's going on. But the second time you watch it, it's just like an absolute beautiful work of art. And I'm glad you touched on John Powell's music a bit earlier, John, because especially this track for this scene, which on the soundtrack is called Bim Bam Smash, I believe it's called.
Yes, it is, yeah.
It's an absolute incredible banger of a piece that I've used as a temp track way too many times when I cut action scenes. And the way that it builds, it's constantly evolving all the way up to the point where you get into the tunnel, which point it just starts ramping up and up and up and gets more desperate and comes to this perfect kind of punctuated conclusion. In my opinion, it is a perfect car chase scene.
Yeah.
No one has made a better car chase than this yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's I hadn't actually considered that one, but it's actually a very good choice. I might have to rethink one of my choices. But okay, John, what have you got?
Oh, I'm in complete agreement. I think it's absolutely head and shoulders above a great deal of everything else that had gone before, and probably after. You know, what happens afterwards is you get more technology, you get more chances to change stuff, and this is where it happened for real. I'm not even convinced that the pod had actually been invented by then. I think they were still doing it in a slightly different way. Certainly with the later Skyfall onwards, 2012 time, this sort of pod on the roof and the actors in the car. I've got a feeling that some of these shots were actually of Dear Matt being thrown out into traffic in certain cases, with a stunt guy in the car with him on camera in certain cases. So I mean, they really are pushing. Greengrass has got to a stage where he's going, okay, let's just go with it and see how it goes. You know, he's been told left, right, and said, you know, you can't do this. We've got to keep him safe, and we've got to do this. Yeah, no, that's fine. Just push him into traffic, and some of it really is it's unbelievably good. And I don't believe that it's been topped. Really, I think it's absolute cutting edge. And just on the music there for a moment, John Powell's work throughout his series of films, fabulous. The difference between that and James Newton Howard on the other picture is extraordinary. It's like polar opposites. Very, very strange how the whole feel of the film does change considerably. I find it a very difficult score to listen to all the way through. And yet with the other scores, there's a number of John Powell moments where he says he just brings everything up to a certain point or gives you a theme to go with, and it's very lovely. And I don't think he does get enough credit for that. But certainly from the action, yes, Supremacy for me, definitely that car chase is magnificent.
So that's 2 votes for the ultimate moment of Supremacy. Cam?
I fought so hard with myself over this one because, like, the Tangiers chase in Ultimatum is unbelievable and maybe the most iconic sequence in the Bourne franchise. It's up there. The pen fight is also up there. But I also had to go with the Moscow car chase, and that, like, people so often look at the French Connection car chase. That's the one you'll often hear filmmakers, reference when it comes to car chases. Matt Reeves was talking all about it on the press rounds for The Batman, for example. But, like, I feel like if you ask audiences now the car chases that matter to them, French Connection is kind of the academic answer. It's the one that film buffs and, critics would throw out there. But I think if you ask just random moviegoers who are really into their franchise films and their blockbusters, This car chase in Bourne Supremacy, I think, is going to be high in their estimation. Probably the car chase in Ultimatum as well. But like this one in Supremacy, I remember revisiting it and being absolutely blown away at how unbelievably propulsive it was and how I was essentially on the edge of my seat throughout. And I watch a lot of action sequences, and a lot of them are very passive experiences of kind of sitting back and being like, this one's not really working. You know, a lot of Marvel action sequences can fall into that category.
Yeah.
But this car chase is just next level, and I like to think that, like, the realism of it scared the crap out of, say, like, the Bond producers, because they were going CG and Die Another Day, and I'd like to think it was sequences like this that made them go, uh-oh, we need to try to up the ante in practical action, and, you know, we get things like Casino Royale onwards.
Certainly. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
It's interesting because I did a rewatch of all 5 films before we recorded this, and I was kind of like not paying attention too much during Supremacy because I knew it was a good film. And I was sort of on my phone, I was doing some emails, and then this car chase started up, and I immediately stopped everything I was doing.
Yeah, you've just got to watch it, haven't you?
Yeah, it's fixed on the screen. I would give it my vote, but it's already won. So I'm going to give it to what would have been my original vote.
Okay.
And that is the Tangiers chase.
Right.
I mean, previous guests on the show, Jerry Answer and Matt Damon, put together, along with the team, of course, put together a fantastic sequence. It's so intense. It's a claustrophobic fight between them, and the chase to get there in the first place. It's the moment I think about when I think about Bourne.
It's also interesting that you've got the first part of the motorbike chase. Okay, this is exciting, right? It's a motorbike, and then it's a foot chase, and it's still as exciting.
Mm.
You know, they haven't. It's not toned down simply on the basis that he's on foot. No, it's great because he's on foot. You know, so it's very good. I can see why that would get your vote, certainly.
That scene is my Sophie's choice.
Yeah.
So it's like if it wasn't going to be the car chase from Supremacy, it was going to be that.
Right.
So it's like it feels like we're all in full agreement about what the 2 best scenes from the series are.
Yeah.
Same page. Yeah. Yeah.
If we could give it to both, we would. But it looks like the car chase in Supremacy is winning that. But in terms of worst, I'm going to go for the moment in Bourne Identity when Jason Bourne rides a man down a flight of stairs like a surfboard. I bumped on it when I first saw it. I bumped on it again the other day. I bumped on it when me and Cam did a commentary on it on the Patreon. It's the silliest effing moment in all 5 films, and I have no idea why it's in it. But it makes me laugh, but it is definitely the worst moment in any of the films.
And yet he carries it off like a pro, doesn't he? He rides that man with aplomb.
I always make a reference to Red Dwarf whenever I think about that, with Ace Rimmers riding down a crocodile, but no one's ever seen Red Dwarf or listens to the show, apparently. So that's my connection. But Cam, what about you? Worst moment?
The thing with the Bourne franchise is there's not a lot of worsts. There's the ones you don't like as much, but there's not a lot of like badly directed sequences or anything like that. So for mine, I went with a little bit of a jokey one, but one that like, look, I'm a kid who grew up on 80s action movies, and when you had sort of the setup of Jason Bourne in Jason Bourne as like, I don't know, like a pit fighter or something like that, I was getting flashbacks to Rambo 3, for example, or the various Jean-Claude Van Damme martial arts films, and it was the old one-punch KO. I get it. It's upsetting your expectations, but at the same time, I'm like, the 80s kid in me wept for that. I was like, oh, would have liked to have seen that fight.
I was waiting for him to dip his hands in toffee and an M&M.
Yeah,
and then into sand.
Yeah.
And then tie that bandana around his head.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. John?
It's more of a... again, Cam hit on that there, where you say you can't really have a worst, which is very true. I don't think there's a worst one. There are moments where you go, why didn't they find some other way of filming that? And in Jason Bourne, during the motorcycle chase, it's very clear on a number of occasions that they are leaning way too far over on the motorcycle to be going around that corner because it's on a rig. And I suppose if you've seen them after a while and you go, why didn't somebody go, don't lean so far this time. We'll do it again, but don't lean out so far this time. So it gives the impression that they're going around a corner are, a very tight corner, when in point of fact they're not going around a very tight corner at all. So when the actors are on the back of this camera rig that's got no front wheel on this thing and it's got a thing attached to it, and they're going around the streets, I had a moment there where I went, apart from that, I enjoyed it enormously, but it's one of those things that I can't not see. You can't unsee it when you see it the first time.
Your expertise is showing there, John.
This is why nobody talks to me at parties. So, what are you driving these days? Well, I've got this roll cage, and I'm thinking, no.
Don't lean too far,
Don't lean
or
too
I'll
far.
find you. Ashley, what have you got?
Okay, I'm going to give a little bit of a controversial answer, but I'm going to back this
We
up.
like controversy. Do it.
Yeah.
My vote is actually going to be for the car chase at the end of Bourne Ultimatum.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And my reasoning for this, and I think this is one of the biggest problems with the Bourne franchise overall, is that they will do something really good, and then they will completely repeat that beat, but do it not as good.
Right.
And the Bourne Ultimatum car chase is really just kind of a repeat of the Supremacy car chase, but not as good. All the way down to the end of, and Jason Bourne does this as well, and I would have picked that if only that Vegas Strip car chase weren't so frickin' spectacular and the crash into the casino at the end. But all three of those car chases end in the exact same way, with a vehicle being T-boned and driven forward towards an obstacle that it collides into, and just like destructs and flies out of control. In Jason Bourne, it actually crams up into the roof of the casino and flies off. And this one, it's Bourne's car gets hung up on the median and driven forward by the asset until it crashes, and it's just a repeat of the same beats. It's the same thing with the whole Marie Nikki thing, where we're just repeating those exact same character beats but with a different character.
Is this the producers and the directors and the writers going, well, if it ain't broke, don't change it, we have to keep the same elements, and that was really good, so we'll do it again? Is that what that is?
I think it's that they know it works. I think they know what they want to drive to. I think it's because it's familiar, but I think the biggest problem is they don't top themselves when they do this. And so that's why the Supremacy chase ends up being here's the gold standard. And then one movie later, they try to okay, we're in a different city and we've tried to mix it up with a few elements, but a lot of the particulars of how this car chase evolves and plays out just ends up being a shorter, less spectacular version of what we already saw.
I mean, the moment in Bourne Legacy where Aaron Cross shoves a quill into someone's hand was quite derivative too.
Quill, yeah. He didn't go to the everyday stationery store. He went to the Ye Olde stationery store. And said, have you got any? I'd love to have seen that actually. If they'd done a fight in a stationery store, start with pens and then people throwing hole punches at each other and ring binders and stuff. Go, yes, this is Tipex. Who threw that?
Well, that's what we need. We need the prequel series that goes back to the Victorian era Treadstone.
Yeah.
Well, I think the last one we'll have in terms of best, worst, and why is a bit of a fun one. I'm going to talk about everyday object used as a weapon, which is a fun little thing that started off in Identity and popped up in every film basically since. Let's go with John first.
I think the magazine is super. Even though the pen was... And I've never. This is the only occasion in a movie, or certainly the only occasion in a movie I've never seen it repeated in everyday life. You never see that in the newspaper or read it online that a man was, brutally killed with a biro, or sustained terrible stab wounds because of a Sharpie. I mean, you don't see that, and yet in this movie, he's holding his own against this knife. In Identity. But the magazine was a different level. Oh, it's not sharp, but he's gonna use it in the same way that he would use a piece of wood, a billiard cue, something. He's still going to give him stick for it. And then, consequently, after doing all of that, then he shoves it in the toaster and burns the house, or blows the house up. It's brilliant. Absolutely wonderful. So I'm a big fan of, and I think that should be, and would it depend on the type of magazine? Would you have a choice? That thing where you look at the opponent and go, woman's own. There's nothing in there. Oh, horse and hound. Yes, here we are. That's a big thick thing. And then beat 7 bells out of them. I think it's...
Farmer's World. Yeah, we'll use that.
World. Tractors bi-weekly. Yeah, I think that's sensational. So yeah, the magazine was a really... And I've never seen that done anywhere else also. It may have been... It's probably a Jackie Chan reference somewhere in one of those Three Dragons pictures where he's picked up a magazine or something or a book or something. But that's the first time I've really seen that in a mainstream picture where, an object like a magazine. Pens, all right, sharp. You can maybe do something with it, but a magazine, that's really clever, and it's always stuck with me as being a very clever implement to use.
What about you, Ashley?
My favorite is going to be the book from the Tangiers chase, when right after he crashes in through the window and gets into a fight with the asset in the room, and at one point he grabs this book, and a book is a nice big heavy weapon to use. We've seen that in movies before, but he does a couple things with it that I think are incredibly effective and play so viscerally in a fight scene. And the first is he takes the spine of it and basically punches his throat with the spine of the book. That's one part of it. And then the other part is he puts the flat of the book against his face and then is punching the book repeatedly, smashing it against the asset's face. And he makes incredible use of that hardcover book. And I think that's such a great element to throw into that scene. And I think that was probably only topped by like John Wick with the library fight.
Yeah.
Where they did some creative book work there.
Yeah.
I seem to recall Joey Answer saying in the interview we had with him that that bit there knocked him for 6.
Yeah.
At least a couple of times. Because that was Matt Damon leaning into the punches.
Yeah.
You kind of have to. That was a very tough sequence to film.
And I have to assume they were using a prop book that was like, like a little bit like...
It was like foam.
Yeah.
Nevertheless,
exactly.
if you hit somebody hard enough with it, if you're not pulling a punch, which evidently Matt possibly wasn't at this stage, you're still going to get the same sort of effect on the other side of that book, So yeah, would have been a
fair play to him for doing it.
I get in there, quite right.
And there was also like a book fight in Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage as well, in a scene meant to evoke Bourne Ultimatum. So it definitely has cast an influence.
I can't let the pen go without a vote. I mean, partially because we're speaking to Nikki Norday later this week, who gets the pen in the hand, and we talk quite extensively about the pen prop. But I think it just sort of set the tempo for everything else.
Sure.
So I have to go with the pen.
Yep, no, fair play.
Cam?
I am in the same boat. I picked the pen as well, and I think it's because I had such a visceral reaction to the shot of him pulling the pen out of his arm. I'm like, oh my God. Like, that was horrific. The magazine was also very effective. The thing about the Bourne franchise was you found early on a lot of critics would cite, the pen, the book, the magazine. Like, they became these iconic moments that people would reference. And it felt like the franchise, as it kept going, kept doing them, and people started mentioning them less and less. But those 3 in particular still get a lot of traction.
It's because it's not just that he stabs the pen through the hand, it's what you would expect. It's that he stabs it like into like the wrist and buries it lengthwise, and you just don't see that, and you can almost feel it when you watch it.
Yeah.
There's like a body horror thing to it.
Yeah.
It's quite grotesque.
Exactly.
It's very horror movie.
Yeah. Cam, worst?
The worst, this was tough. I had the towel in Bourne Ultimatum at the end of the Tangiers chase. It's fine. It's nice to see him use a towel in the fight, but like it doesn't hit with me the same way the ones we've all mentioned for the best did.
That's fair. I think the worst for me, actually, it took a while for me to find this one, but It's actually in the last fight in Jason Bourne, where they're in the sewers of Las Vegas, and he beats up the asset with a saucepan.
It just happened to find live.
Just happens to find a saucepan. He's just belting the guy in the face. And I just think to myself, of all the things that are laying around in the gutters of Las Vegas, you chose to use a saucepan. There's some interesting things down in Las Vegas. Cam and I are very aware, and they're laying around too, and I probably would have used those first.
International pan fighting. Live from Las Vegas. Yeah.
From the MGM Grand.
Face full of saucepan.
We can restage that saucepan fight this summer.
Sure, if you want to. at one of the hotels actually using the film.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Ashley, what have you got?
I'm gonna go with the fire extinguisher gun in Bourne Legacy
I considered this one.
that he puts together, where he drops, like, I can't remember what it is, like was it a screwdriver or a nail or something, like,
Yeah.
into the nozzle of a fire extinguisher, and then uses the fire extinguisher to basically, like, punch it out really fast, like a pneumatic gun, and, like, puncture a guy, which is not uncool. It's a neat kill, but it is so kind of not off the cuff.
It's
And
MacGyver.
that's what I was going to say exactly. It's very MacGyver-y. This is something I would love to see in a MacGyver thing, but in a Jason Bourne movie, it feels like there was too much preparation that had to go into making this a tool. And that's what kind of makes it stick out like a sore thumb for me.
Poor Aaron Cross. Just can't get anything right,
Can't
can
get
he?
a break. Can he?
Well, not enough chems. That's the problem.
John, the final vote.
Well, to be fair, I'm going to go with Cam on this and the towel, primarily because, all right, we've seen it before. We've seen it in a number of different fights, the way people using towels, either flicking the towels or wrapping it around people's heads and using that sort of stuff. But he didn't do anything with it afterwards. What I wanted him to do was to do the thing, dispose of the guy, and mop his brow with it or do something with it. You know, just the way that Pierce did in Goldeneye, that really nice way of, I've just beaten you with this, and good God, isn't it warm in here? And then mop your brow and then throw it to one side. I think they could have written it in much better or done something much more with it. Or maybe it was a tea towel, you know, or a special one you get on holidays, you know, with all the map of Ireland on it or something of that nature. So, you know, they could have done something slightly different with it, but it's a well-worked one. They didn't really do anything new with it. And on the strength of that, well, okay, let's go with that.
I went to Tangier and all I got was
this lousy towel. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our best, worst, and why section. If you disagree or agree with our choices, do let us know on social media. To close us off, folks, before we wrap up, firstly, I want to get everyone's rankings of the Bourne films. Ashley, why don't you lead us off?
All right, best to worst. I'm honestly gonna say that I think Identity is the best. It may not have the best action scenes in it, and I think Paul Greengrass does a better job of setting the aesthetic of this world. But I think on a character level, and a story level, it really kind of sets the template for what it is, and you don't have the rest of the films if you don't have that core set up. And I think it does really well. It hooks really good, and it's just a fascinating, still fun. I did a rewatch of all the movies just, leading up to this, and the movie still completely holds up. It's a great watch. And then from there, I'll just rattle these off real quick. After that, I'm going to go Ultimatum. I actually think the third movie is better than the second one, just story-wise, and that Tangier chase is just so good. And then Supremacy. And then Jason Bourne, which is a movie I don't like very much, but I found myself enjoying it more than I remembered I did, just because some of the action scenes are genuinely well done. And then last, Legacy, which upon rewatching this, as I got halfway through the movie, I was like, I don't remember why I didn't like this movie, because I'm actually having fun with this. This is cool. I'm like rediscovering this. And then as I get towards the back half of the movie, I'm just like,
Then you remember.
oh God, now I remember
Yeah.
why. I already stopped caring about these characters long ago, and I just want to end already.
The chems start wearing off about
They
the 1
do.
hour and 10 minutes mark, and you just
I needed more chems. That was the problem. I ran out of blues.
Then you just throw in your Tangiers towel.
Yeah.
At that point.
That's it.
Yes. John, what about you?
Well, I mean, for me, it's on the basis of enjoyability. Supremacy for me as a whole thing, I think is terrific. So that's always my favourite. And then Identity, I like very much. That again, that's the origin. That's where it all started. And Ultimatum and Jason Bourne and Legacy will be last, because it's not a Matt Damon movie, and I really struggle. I'd watched Legacy. I watched them all again before we did this, but Legacy out of the lot was the one that I really struggled with to really resonate something with Renner and put myself in his place. And I'm just saying, well, there's another bloke who's done this already. You know, it's just this is the other. This is what happens in the other story, and it's just not as appealing. And he's been given, you know, not the greatest script in the world, so he's doing the best he can. They all are, but no, I think Legacy's last for me, and everything Matt Damon-y is before him.
I think that will be a consensus with many people online. It's interesting. I did a poll today on Twitter, just which is your favourite, and by a landslide, Identity won.
Really
Interesting.
By a country mile. And it actually went in release order. After that, it was Supremacy, followed by Ultimatum. I didn't put Legacy on there because I just asked about Jason Bourne films, and then I think only 2% of the votes went to Jason Bourne, the film. That probably won't surprise many people.
No.
I don't think mine have changed from my rewatch, although maybe the last two have swapped around somewhat, but I now go 2, 1, 3, 4, 5. I actually think Jason Bourne, despite some of its good action sequences, I think it just lacks any villain whatsoever that has any lasting value or is interesting at all. Whereas Legacy at least has a good villain, and it's trying to do something slightly different with a new character. So I appreciate it trying something more, whereas Jason Bourne just feels like the greatest hits.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is fine. We all love a good greatest hits album, but I wanted something different. Cam, what about you?
I think I have the same order as you, Scott. I think I have Supremacy, Ultimatum, Identity. And it's kind of like that central trilogy is so incredible that it's kind of like they kind of stand as a 3. And then we kind of put some space in between them and the other 2. So I follow it up with Legacy at number 4, or at number 4, and then Jason Bourne in last place. For me, Jason Bourne, it's a little bit of more of the same, but it's also like, you remember that amazing moment at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade when they ride off into the sunset, and you're like, what a way to end a trilogy. You could not end better. And then they give you Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and you're like,
what's this?
We kind of undid sort of that perfect ending to do that. That's kind of how I feel about Jason Bourne. It's not as maybe egregious as a Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but I kind of look at it and go, they brought him back for that? Like, it just doesn't feel like they were inspired. Whereas, like, Legacy, I go, Tony Gilroy was clearly inspired to do something kind of strange in the world of Bourne, so it's sort of an interesting offshoot movie for me.
I agree. And I think the last question before we finish up today is, where do you want to see this franchise go now? I'll just throw it out to everyone if anyone has any thoughts on the matter. What would you like to see? Or is this the end for you? Do you not want to see any more Bourne?
Personally, I'm perfectly happy with what's happened already. Because again, you get that you get the Legacy treatment. You know, what else can happen? Somebody who they've come full circle. Bourne started drifting in water and was brought upon the a fishing boat, and at the end of the last movie ended up in water, so he's gone the full circle. And anything else that comes after that is going to be a guy who can't remember where he's done or what he's doing, and he's working for an agent, and somebody's trying to kill him, and he doesn't know who, but they've got other people coming towards him. Are you going to do that as a TV show? Are you going to do it as a separate series? It's been done, since then. Other shows have gone on and done it. Maybe they've done it better in half-hour segments, or they've done it in little bits and pieces. But from a movie point of view, no, I don't think it needs anything else. Once you've done it. You've done it with those pictures. Let it lie. Move on to something else. I'm certainly Matt Damon's not excited about doing anything else. So, if they are going to do it with a new actor, you'd probably have to do it in a similar sort of vein to before, and I don't see the point.
I'm kind of in the same boat with this, where I don't know how you go further with this. There's a few different routes, and they've tried most of them already. If you look at the books, they've just continued Jason Bourne comes out of retirement because the agency needs him for this.
Yeah.
It's well, it's not very interesting. And they kind of do that. That's what Jason Bourne is. And that movie, quite honestly, doesn't really work. They tried doing the Passing the Torch movie. That didn't really work. They've tried, I don't know how many people have actually seen this, but they tried doing the prequel TV series. There's a Treadstone series that was on Amazon Prime got one season. There's 10 episodes that are out there. It's fine, but I don't know, it didn't particularly grab me. I didn't love it. So I don't know where you go with this. And the other big problem is one of the greatest strengths about the Bourne trilogy, we'll just talk about the first three movies, is that it is centered, they're all called Bourne for a reason. It's Jason Bourne. And it's all centered around his arc, him trying to figure out who he is. It is a very personal journey of this one character. And of course, this entire world gets built around this character, the world of espionage, CIA, assets, killers, etc., etc. But it is very much centered around that conceit. And once you get away from that conceit, what's the appeal? I'm not sure there is any. So I think once you finish that arc, it's kind of you've mined what's there, and everything else we've seen on the periphery, we're just it looks like it's spinning its wheels and doesn't know what to do. And for excuse the irony of this, doesn't have an identity.
Right. I think that the fact that it's been encapsulated in those group of pictures now allows a new a breed of filmmaker to now think, right, what can I do now with my films, my different characters, my storylines, the way that Bourne took from Bond. Now people will take from Bourne and move forwards, so you want it as a stepping stone going forward. I wouldn't want it to come back and go over old stuff again. Let's take little elements of this, and that was good in that movie. Well, let's use it. Let's use it in my picture, and let's use it in that and see how far it goes with it, Doug Liman did exactly the same thing with his stuff later down the line.
Mm-hmm. I think a big part of the problem is there's something very rigid about the Bourne formula, which is funny to say as people that watch James Bond movies, because you can obviously point at all the various facets of a James Bond movie, but there's real shifting tones there. Casino Royale does not feel like Live and Let Die, or Scott and I have recently been revisiting some of the classic Bonds just for the Patreon, and the first four Connery movies feel very different from one another. There's always a real shakeup in terms of what these movies feel like and kind of the approaches they come at them from, whereas the Bournes feel very monolithic in terms of their tone, in terms of the types of stories they're telling, and there's a reason you start introducing Treadstone, Blackbriar, Outcome, Larks, Iron Hand. It's different names for the same thing because they don't have a variety. So unless they really take a hard look at the world of these novels and just find an entirely different angle to tackle this material with, and maybe reboot the whole thing, I don't think you can do anything more with the Matt Damon version of Jason Bourne, because he's kind of a character that doesn't want to be there, and you can only stretch that out for so long, especially when you've completed the character arc.
The only thing I have to add, I completely agree a lot of what you all have said. I think there's a thread at the end of Jason Bourne that I think was a massive missed opportunity. And I could see it as a film. and that is Jason Bourne going back into the agency and trying to work for the good of mankind. He's a patriot. He wants to help the United States and work with the people he has fought for the last four films. I think that's a really interesting twist, and if they had done that at the end of Jason Bourne, I think that would have been a lot of fun. But instead, you got this like, I was listening to you in the car, ooh, and then here's the Moby score. There we go.
Yeah.
That's fine, but I think that was an interesting angle, and maybe and seeing like an older Bourne who can't fight as well anymore. But I don't know whether it's like a handing a baton film where there's two and he's training a new person or something. I don't know. There's something there. Bourne working for the people he's been fighting for so long now. I think that's interesting. I think Matt Damon has no interest in doing it anymore, so it's probably never going to happen. But there's a reason why we're here sitting talking about Bourne Identity 20 years later, because the character, the performance, the world that this was built by these professionals, these actors, these stuntmen, editors, cinematographers, directors, all of them have created a fascinating landscape of spy films that we can tackle. And I don't know if it's quite dead yet. So I would like to think there's hope.
Yep.
There's always hope.
Can't argue with that.
Plus, Universal needs hits.
Yes. Yeah. They need the money. That's all it boils down to. It's just green. That's all they're back on.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of everyone, your checks are in the post.
A super thing.
Well, before we wrap up, we have some quick messages from our former guests on the Bourne episodes, so we'll throw to those now. And joining us now as part of our Bourne franchise celebration is Mr. David Lowbridge Ellis, licensed to queer. Welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, talking about Bourne again.
Yes, well, you were our first guest ever.
And talking about Bourne back then as well.
Exactly. We're here celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Bourne Identity. And so,
good Lord, that makes me feel old. I don't know about you, Scott.
Oh, we spent a good time talking about that in today's episode. Yeah. Don't worry about that. But the discussion really is about sort of celebrating the Bourne franchise itself. So we have 3 questions for all of our former guests. The first one to you, sir, is what does the Bourne franchise mean to you?
I'm going to quote the end of Fight Club here. I think these films, well, paraphrase at least, these films met me at a very strange time in my life. Or at least the ones that I like. We'll get into my ranking in a minute. The ones that I like did. So as I explored in your first ever guest episode, the Bourne Supremacy, I really connected with that film as a gay man who was struggling to come to terms with his identity. I very much connected with that film in particular. And as I've explored at length on your podcast and elsewhere, spying and queerness cannot be separated. It's that whole concealing who you are and am I really a good person? Which, Jason ultimately learns that he's maybe not a horrible person, but he's at least done some things in his past which he's certainly not proud of and he's trying to atone for. And that's particularly why I love the Bourne Supremacy, because it's got that whole atonement arc going on.
Yeah, I think we did dive into that in the episode, and I'd urge everyone to go back and listen to it if you haven't already, our Bourne Supremacy review. But it's interesting, like, of all of our guests, this one hits home for you in that sense. I think you're the only one who's had that sort of unique perspective on it, and it's good to see films from that sort of, different angles, because someone could just see that scene, we spoke about it, that Jason running down the beach could be meaningless to someone else, but for you as a teenager, I believe at the time, you drew a lot from that. Very simple.
No, I'm older than that, Scott. I saw how old? When was Bourne Supremacy? 2004.
2004.
Yeah, I was 22 then, so...
you don't look it, sir. You don't look it.
Thank you.
Well, that brings me to my next question then. Bourne rankings. How do you rank all 5 Bourne films?
I'm going to be really honest. I only like 2.5 of them. So I love Supremacy. That's head and shoulders above the rest. I really like Ultimatum. I've seen that a number of times. I do sort of like Identity, but I think it's more the concept of it rather than the actual execution. And I know that film had a particularly tortured production history. which others might have gone into, and I think that shows on the screen. It's lacking in its own sort of identity, if you'll excuse the pun. But it's kind of half art movie, half action movie, and the two don't really cohere for me. So it's the second one which really brings everything together. I really wanted to love Jason Bourne because I love the Greengrass, Supremacy and Ultimatum. I really wanted to love it, but I actually got really annoyed by it as I was watching it, as I thought about it more after I watched it. I've only ever seen it once, so I can barely remember anything about it. But I just felt it was completely redundant, and it was sort of treading water in a way. So I didn't like that one. And the Bourne Legacy is one of the most boring experiences I've had in the cinema that I do not remember. And it's a shame because I love Jeremy Renner and many of the other cast members. I just thought it was a complete waste, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a misfire with Mr. Renner, but I don't think it falls at his feet.
No, definitely not, no.
No, so it sounds like you're going Supremacy, Ultimatum, Identity, Bourne, Jason Bourne, and then Bourne Legacy.
That's right, yeah.
That seems to be lining up with some of our guests this week, so
really?
That's fine indeed. Mr. Jon Auty, I think, was around about the same.
Mm.
The final question to you, sir, before you leave us and disappear like Jason Bourne into the waters. Where would you like to see the Bourne franchise go?
I found a quote from Tony Gilroy, who was basically brought on to save the film, the first movie, and then fell out epically with Doug Liman. I'm still not sure how to pronounce his name. But I think everyone fell out with Doug, though, during the course of the production of that movie, and that's why he wasn't invited back. But Gilroy said to Lyman, whatever, I guess your movie should be about a guy who finds the only thing he knows how to do is kill people. That's, it's not the only series or even individual film which deals with that dimension. James Bond arguably deals with that to an extent as well. James Bond has never liked killing people, certainly in the novels. I wonder, though, if Bourne actually did get good at doing anything else. So I'm not suggesting we have a whole series of movies where he learns how to do basket weaving and whatever kind of other pastimes might be lying around. But maybe he does have some kind of normal life. Like, I haven't read much of the Ludlam books, but he does have a wife and, he's more kind of domestically settled and that kind of thing. So maybe if they did sort of go that angle, but again, I don't know how you're going to redo it. I don't know whether it's kind of a hard reboot and you don't bring his name's just going out of my head. Help, Matt Damon. you don't bring Matt Damon back, or you have somebody else, because I think they're kind of scared of doing that, really. But it's certainly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what story I want, really.
I think a lot of people have trouble thinking what you do next, because really it did end at Ultimatum for a lot of people, and the rest of it was just a weird extension. So why bother? But
they all feel a bit footnotey. The other movies, so him falling off the building, and you can kind of fill in the blanks, and maybe he does sort of get that normal life, and he does learn how to. I mean, the interest could be that if he only knows how to kill people, what actually trying to find some kind of purpose in life beyond just surviving, I think might be an interesting way to go. But then again, that's probably a completely different story, isn't it? It's not going to be a spy action adventure movie then if he is learning to ride horses and actually I suppose different environments, because Bourne movies are really urban movies in lots of ways. I know there's the scene in the rural farmhouse, which was something that Lyman really fought for on the first film, but they're very urban movies in lots of ways. So maybe having Bourne in kind of a more rural setting, that might work.
I just can't shake the idea now you put it in my head of him being like a sous chef in a kitchen.
Yeah.
Not the head chef, but just underneath. He doesn't want all the responsibility, but he likes cooking.
What careers could Jason Bourne, it could be Jason Bourne, sous chef. Jason Bourne, basket weaver. It could be a whole spin-off series.
That sounds like a direct-to-Amazon show if I ever did hear it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, David, I want to thank you again for joining us. This appearance now has put you at number 1 place for our most appearances of all time. Congratulations. Oh, wow. I will send you your trophy.
I am prolific. I am ubiquitous.
I've heard.
Sorry, everyone.
So I've heard. But we'll put links in the show notes below. So once again, David, Mr. License to Queer himself, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I am joined now by Nathan from the Mission Impossible podcast. He joined us some time ago to tackle the Bourne Ultimatum with his co-host Aaron, and that was one of the most contentious knocklist debates we ever had. It was split 50-50, so it didn't quite make the list. But Nathan, it must have felt pretty crazy to be part of that discussion.
Yeah, it was a strange one to think about because I know you guys don't often have 4 guests, probably for that very reason. But it was, I just remember how interesting the debate of like, wait, seriously, you guys aren't going to put it on here?
You and I both voted yes. We were in the right?
Yeah, I think more of a representation of like spy cinema, but I guess if you're going to have to pick one, it would be Supremacy.
Supremacy was already in. We could have added Ultimatum. Come on.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think Ultimatum does everything that Supremacy does a lot better and a lot cleaner.
Right, yeah. I think I was on pretty much the same page. I like Supremacy more, but I think Ultimatum deserved to be on there. But as Scott's not here right now, I can say that.
I like scenes of Supremacy more. just while he's not in the room. Same with Aaron.
Now, we are wrapping up the Bourne franchise as a whole, so I'm curious, first question. What does the Bourne franchise mean to you personally?
You know what? I came into a certain realization with both the first Transformers film and the original Top Gun, where I respect its contributions to cinema more than I actually like go back and revisit it as a franchise. I think the first one by Doug Liman is solid stuff. It certainly is not the huge spark that, I mean, it was a big hit, but it isn't the spark of like creative ingenuity that the other ones are.
Right.
And it isn't as responsible for a certain era of action that became often mocked and often just like, the shaky cam action. In the same way that you watch Transformers and you look at that movie and you can see the correlation between the next like decade of filmmaking as far as scale. But, people are immediately quick to dismiss those movies specifically. I wouldn't say Bourne has quite that same issue, but yeah, I guess I approach this franchise as one that I've watched numerous times, usually on camping trips because they're just kind of fun. You turn them on, they're over before they start, they're just always moving. But I never carried on to the Renner one, like I was saying at the top of this recording when we were just having a little preamble stuff. I never watched the Jason Bourne one that I can't remember what the text over the poster was, where it's like, you will remember his name or something. It was something that they always did. I think they literally had like the Martian poster with Matt Damon with text over him and that one on like similar marquees.
Why didn't you proceed with the 4th and 5th? Like after Ultimatum, were you just like, I'm out? Did they just not appeal to you in the marketing? What was it? Like, why did you not, even for completist sake, finish it?
I mean, I'm eventually going to thread that needle. I think I'm trying to think of a good comparison point because you know what? It's like Pirates of the Caribbean, where you get to the 3rd one and you're like, well, that's a conclusion of this franchise. I don't really need anything else. And then the next one is like, okay, we've gotten rid of the main characters. I can't remember if they have anybody from I haven't seen Bourne Legacy, so I'm not sure if they have anybody else. I'm not sure if they threw in like a Brian Cox or somebody to make like a 2-minute appearance or something like that.
There's some very, very brief cameos, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much the same thing, but with the 4th one, they really were trying to give you another version of the protagonist, which I consider, if we're talking Pirates of the Caribbean, like Will Turner. I felt like that arc was closed, therefore my relationship with the franchise was closed, and it was at a point in which they were really trying to push Renner on me, and I like Renner, and Renner is solid, but like Renner, Ghost Protocol sort of proved that like Renner isn't the person to hitch your franchise in. Like within the movie, they almost cast him as the Tom Cruise role, and then they're just like, no, we can cut this back. And they literally did it with the next one where they get Matt Damon back. So I was kind of like not interested in either of them. I'm like, are they trying to sell me on another decade of Bourne? Like Bourne is it's a perfect looped 3 trilogy deal. And I'm not sure if your series has made you realize, like, you know what? Legacy is the second best of these movies, or like Jason Bourne is silently rips.
No, I think I'm more of an apologist for Legacy, but Jason Bourne is, for me, the weakest of the group. So I can't say that that's the one that really gave, kind of a burst of life to that franchise going forward. And that kind of leads me into, normally this is how I close out these interviews, and I believe Scott's doing the same, but I think I'm going to jump to this question now. With Jason Bourne not really performing particularly well and seemingly ending the Bourne franchise, at least for now, do you see a future for Jason Bourne on the big screen? Does it feel like something we could have, many years down the road, the way that James Bond has endured, or does it feel very tied to its specific time?
I feel like not on the big screen. I hate saying like it should be a TV show, because that is my like constant criticism with TV, where like you'll watch like 10 episodes of a show and you'll be like, oh, this could have very easily been a movie, or 6 episodes of like a Disney show, and you're just like, this could have easily been a movie. But I feel like there might be some juice mined for all the like Reacher fans and the Jack Ryan fans to have a Jason Bourne franchise.
There was Treadstone. You're forgetting the Treadstone TV show.
I remember Treadstone. Believe me. We talked about Taken. They did like a Taken TV show too. So yeah, they always do those, but those were more like similar to like how there's a Starman TV show in the 80s where you're just like, okay, so we're just sort of doing the same thing. This is like the way how TV's based off of movies. The TV shows based off of movies have been received outside of like when Fargo and Hannibal and stuff like that. I know Hannibal's like a readaptation, but I don't see a future on the big screen. Not because I would necessarily oppose to seeing it. I mean, it would take a lot to get me in the door. I mean, I would have to watch the next 2 movies, and they would have to give me like a compelling, like, I'm trying to think of like what director, like, maybe get Gareth Edwards, who did The Raid, and he's doing like an old man Jason Bourne. I don't fucking know.
It does feel like it kind of begins and ends with Matt Damon, and I think that's their biggest hurdle they have.
Yeah, and I don't think Damon has the same star power that like a Tom Cruise has right now, or even like a Denzel Washington, where like I feel like everybody feels like they got their fix of Damon in those movies in his prime. And Damon, I don't think is going to have like the physical commitment that he used to. Not because he needs to or anything. I think he's proven himself, and it's one of those things where there's that, where I don't think that character has as much appeal. We also don't really get spy films on that level that aren't like, that haven't remained consistent or like consistently inconsistent. Like you go see a Bond movie and it sucks, and you go see the next Bond. Like Bond is always going to be an evergreen franchise. I just don't think we're in that era where we are making just straight up action movies as much, unless they star like Mark Wahlberg or Denzel Washington or Liam Neeson, and they are just like made directly to sell all right and then go straight to Redbox for the people who find them. And I don't think those people are seeing Jason Bourne movies.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And I think just to wrap up this interview, we're asking everyone this question as well. When you look at the Bourne franchise and you've just watched the initial trilogy, what is your favorite film? And are there any moments that jump to you as being hugely impactful that you've kind of carried with you in kind of your memory, just in terms of, what Bourne means?
I think with Identity, there are quite a few scenes that step up to me. My favorite is Ultimatum. I think I said that even in the episode. I just feel like that's where they kind of refined it and figured out like how to really. It's where everything's escalating. It's kind of like a Mission Impossible movie, or like any good sequel where things are just getting bigger and bigger. And I mean, the opening to Identity is just really strong as far as a hook. Once you go into Supremacy, I think the car chase is specifically like a scene that really changed action filmmaking. And the ending of it, the idea of like, hey, we're not doing like a James Bond. He's got to deal with the weight of all of his decisions, even though like there's really no deep storytelling. At the end of the day, he's just Wolverine without the claws. And you watch it, and at any scene, you could be like, hey, I went to the bathroom. What's going on? Well, he's on the run and he figured out a new key to tracking down and figuring out what treadstone is. Like that entire franchise kind of functions mindlessly. I think I even said that in the recording. So, and then I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, the Bourne versus Dash fight is maybe the pinnacle of all shaky cam fights. There's just a lot of like visuals that stick out. It is so much more the directing. And when I think about Bourne, I just think like, wow, what a well-directed trilogy.
You know, Ultimatum didn't make the knock list, but it made the N and C list for Nathan and Cam.
How long were you sitting on that?
About 5 seconds.
Yeah, it was pretty good then. Well, thanks a bunch, buddy. This is fun.
Thank you. That's what I'm here for. And we are joined by Josh from the For Nerds by Nerds podcast. He joined us for the Bourne Legacy back in the day. Now, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong. When we covered that film, you were fairly new to the Bourne franchise, correct?
Yeah, I had only seen the first one, and I've still only seen that one and this one.
Okay, no, that's fascinating. I want some follow-up there because it's been, I guess, almost, probably close to a year. What has been the roadblock? What has kept you from diving into the Bourne franchise?
It's just so long. And I think it's one of those things where, they're not what you want them to be. They're not what you think they're going to be. Like, from the commercials, I was thinking about this earlier today. I think the third one did phenomenally well. I remember when that came out, it was exploded at the box office, and when it came out on DVD, it was selling like hotcakes. And I think it's because the trailers make you think it's going to be like an action-packed thrill ride, but they're not action-packed thrill rides. There's a lot of talking in these movies, and a lot of I don't know, just it's a lot of fancy words just to try to make you think they're intelligent, I think. So, it gets a little heavy, and it's kind of like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Right.
That is a lot of talk and a very little action.
I remember we had a guest on, I believe it was Nathan from Mission Impossible, or Mission Impossible, I should say, who referred to the Bourne movies as I think smart dumb movies or something like that, where they try to give the sort of air of being very, very, very smart, but are they? It's debatable.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with the Bourne Legacy is that they wanted to do a fun action movie, but then while they were making it, they remembered that it's supposed to be a Bourne movie. So they're like, we got to throw in all this espionage talk and government work and all this stuff, and it's that's the most boring part. Nobody cares about that stuff. We want to see somebody getting stabbed with a ballpoint pen.
So a big part of the focus of this roundtable we're doing is to kind of look at the legacy of the Bourne franchise. And I think it's really interesting to talk to you, someone who is not a student of Bourne, because it's very easy to ask people that are obsessed with the movies, what's the legacy? And they have so many poetic things to say. But for you kind of standing on the outside, what does the Bourne franchise even mean to you in pop culture?
I think the biggest impact it's had is that it changed the world of James Bond for the better. Because James Bond was at a very boring and non-believable point, and once the Bourne movies came out and they rebooted James Bond to be we gotta be more like this, we gotta be more grounded in reality and do a lot more physical, realistic fights, and James Bond has to be, someone who can be injured instead of this unkillable machine. I think it took that entire franchise and changed it because the people started to gravitate more towards the Bourne franchise to be yeah, look at him, he's just a guy, but he's fighting like a madman.
And you have covered Bourne Identity, or not covered, but you've seen Bourne Identity and covered Bourne Legacy with us.
Yes.
When you look at those two films, which one do you regard as your favorite of the two?
I like Bourne Identity a lot.
Right.
But I didn't mind Legacy. Legacy, it didn't do well, and everyone really got on it. I think just because of the lack of Matt Damon. But I thought it was fun. I thought it kind of ended abruptly, but overall, I mean, the first one definitely had a much bigger impact on cinema than the Bourne Legacy did.
Do you have a favorite moment from one of the ones you've watched that stands out?
That first fight with the pen, I always bring up the ballpoint pen. Him fighting that guy, and he's got a knife and he's got a pen. is just so well choreographed, and I had never seen anything like that before. Where it's like, this guy is crazy. He doesn't even know he can fight, and he's gonna go at a guy with a Bic pen.
Yeah, very big, impactful moment there that definitely changed up action for the years to come, especially when you look at like a John Wick film and they're fighting with like books and stuff like that.
Yeah, it really changed fight choreography in cinema altogether, because I feel like every action film from then on deserves should write the Bourne Identity a letter saying thank you for the idea, because everybody changed their fight style to that sort of realistic kind of close combat style of fighting.
Definitely. And just our final question we're asking everyone, a little different for you maybe, because a lot of the people we've talked to are, students of the franchise, right? You've watched the first and then the Jeremy Renner entry. We have kind of, it seems, finished up with the Matt Damon era of Bourne films. The last one wasn't really well received. Do you see a future for this franchise? Does it seem like something of its time, or could it be like a James Bond where, 50 years from now we're talking about more Jason Bourne films?
Yeah, I mean, they could totally James Bond it and have somebody else. I mean, they kind of do it with everybody. Who's the other one? Jack Ryan. He's been played by like 7 different people.
Yeah.
And it's totally, it's something. I just think you might get a lot of backlash. People might not see the film or say the film's bad just because it doesn't have Matt Damon. But I could also see them doing a Jason Bourne again and just waiting 10 years and doing another one with Matt Damon. This time he has a beard or something.
I think old Bourne could be interesting, for sure.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see where they go with a lot of movies, of just giving it time to breathe and seeing if they what franchises they wind up coming back to 20, 30 years from now.
Well, the way IP is going these days, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's definitely going to happen. They're out of ideas.
Okay, Josh, thanks so much. We had a great time with you on Legacy, and hopefully we get you back on soon.
Absolutely.
And joining us now, one half of the Chick Lit podcast, it is Karen. She joined us, of course, for our Jason Bourne review, the final of the 5 Bourne films. Firstly, Karen, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely smashing. Even better for seeing you.
Oh.
Well, we are here to sort of say farewell and adieu to the Jason Bourne franchise. So we've brought all of our guests back for a couple of questions. The first question I have for you is, what is the Jason Bourne, the Bourne Identity, all the Bourne films, what do they mean to you?
Oh, what a good question. I was thinking about this beforehand, and there's so much wrapped up. I was a real nerdy kid. So I didn't like the action movies that I had seen or that came out when I was a kid, like the big, bombastic, I'm trying to think. Well, this didn't come out when I was a kid, but the Indiana Jones movies or things like that with crazy car chases and unrealistic stunts, and I never quite identified with that. I was very much not a big action movie person. I mean, I was a kid. I was not really that into them. And then I think the Bourne Identity, I'm pretty sure that I saw the Bourne Identity first because Ultimatum had just come out and I'd never seen any of them. And it was kind of that, oh, let's, go to the family movies on the weekend. Let's go see this action movie. And so I watched the Bourne Identity and I was like, well, this is something different. This is so different and new and interesting, and it has more of a realistic bent to the way that the world is. And then we went to see Ultimatum, and I was just going from the first film to Ultimatum was such a shocker because of the shaky cam and all of that, and I hadn't seen Supremacy yet, so I fell in love with it. I just loved again, I love learning about politics and the way that the world works. I'm asking my mom all kinds of ridiculous questions that she has no answers to when I'm 9 or 10. And I loved just sort of seeing how the sausage is made, like at the CIA. Well, how the movie industry thinks that it's made. I'm sure anyone that works at the CIA is probably like, that's not realistic. We just sit in cubicles all day and don't do anything. But I had a very profound sense of justice as a kid too. You know, I would like write speeches about climate change, and much to my very conservative parents' chagrin. And I think there's just such a great like sense of justice, and it's like he's trying to do what he's trying to do to figure out who he is, but in that wake he's got people using him on both sides, the people who want to cover things up and the people who want to uncover things. And I don't know, I just really identified so much with that. And just, you know, the dressing down of a spy franchise kind of, and in contrast, people always talk about it in contrast to Bond. But that's it's in a roundabout way that is what it means to me. It's kind of a new, fresh take on that we needed in the 2000s on the spy genre.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think we do get into that in the chat, and the parallels of Bond and how it sort of informs the spy genre going forward. I think Bourne was really a precursor to a lot of the spy films we saw afterwards. Now, the next question I have for you, and you have prepared for this, is what is your ranking for the Bourne films, including Legacy?
Oh, I agonized over this. So the final list that I came up with was Supremacy. This is top down. Supremacy, Identity, Ultimatum, Jason Bourne, and Bourne Legacy.
We were so close to being the same. It's a shame.
I stressed,
great list, though. Great list.
I stressed about where to put Identity versus Ultimatum, but
I know you're not much of a Renner fan.
I'm not. I've come around. Me not being a Jeremy Renner fan has actually made me a lot of cool internet friends. So now it's sort of just a meme for me of like, yeah, Karen hates Jeremy Renner, but whatever.
No Renners allowed in this club.
No Renners allowed.
Well, the final question before I let you go is, what do you want to see happen to the franchise now?
I love this question. Okay, so there's a lot of Bourne origins throughout the films. I think it would be interesting to have just one film that's actually just dedicated to that. So kind of what they were trying to do in Jason Bourne, but not a terrible subplot in a even worse, like, bigger plot. But I think it would be really neat to kind of see the next generation of Bourne. And again, I think they were trying to do that with Legacy. But it didn't quite land for me. The square didn't fit the circle.
Blue pills, red pills, green pills, chems.
I need my chems. I'm out of my chems. But yeah, I would love to see something that I sort of enjoyed once I had played out watching my DVDs of the Bourne series as a kid was the books that followed up the trilogy, the original Robert Ludlum trilogy. They were posthumously penned by a friend of his, and they were really interesting. And it was sort of, I'm reading them in the late 2000s, early 2010s. They were sort of born for the next generation. It was kind of, Bourne's coming out of retirement to go take down a terrorist cell or something. And then turns out that the government was paying the terrorist cell the whole time. And the real, not to spoil anything, but I would love to see, a new world of Bourne. I feel like they tried so hard to do that in Jason Bourne, but they just didn't have enough young people on the writing staff or something.
Or in the actors.
Or, yeah. The technology. We have the technology.
Tommy Lee Jones talking about reach will never get old.
Is it the reach of the app? But yeah, seeing Bourne dropped into a situation where he has to combat Russian hackers, and maybe he has a younger friend who's like trying to show him the ropes or something. I don't know. Like, I think that could be a fun, interesting thing to explore if it was done well.
No, I actually agree. It was quite close to what my pitch was, which was, to have him come back into the fold.
Yeah.
And try and change it from the inside to make it a force for good.
Yeah.
Which is where they were going with Jason Bourne, and then for some reason decided to make it like a Moby playing in the background twist ending. I don't know. A strange choice.
All right.
But hey ho. We had 5 films. Let's say we enjoyed them as they were. I'd like to see Matt Damon come back, but that sounds like it's just us. Yeah,
I personally would. Maybe not have him be the hero of the film necessarily, but a couple of cameos or kind of adjacent to the plot would be interesting.
Adjacent.
Bourne to the plot.
Perfect. We have to end on that amazing note, Karen. Thank you for coming back and allowing us to bid farewell to the Bourne franchise.
Absolutely. And to your co-host, I would say get some rest, Cam. You look tired.
Perfect. And there you go, folks. That was our Bourne Roundtable. It's been a great time talking about these films with the previous guests and with, of course, Jon and Ashley today. I want to thank you both for taking the time to sit down and chart the course of the Bourne franchise.
It wasn't hard work. It was great fun. So any time you ever need somebody to go, would you mind sitting down and going through these movies? Happy to help. No problem.
Thanks so much for having me. This is incredibly fun. And I forgot how enthusiastic I get about these movies.
Well, I'll make sure to make some Tangier towels and
Yes.
send you all a version. I actually might just do that now for giggles. But just before I let you both go, where can people find more from yourselves? So, Jon, you first.
Well, my social media really is based around the big three, I suppose. Twitter, at Stunt Central, you'll find me there, and Behind the Stunts on Insta and on Facebook, and the YouTube channel. So Behind the Stunts on type it into anywhere. The podcast comes out on a Wednesday. I've had a little hiatus break, but I'm back on this Friday with at time of recording anyway. This Friday with an episode of discussion about Tom Cruise and the controversial work in which many newspapers keep referring to him doing his own stunts. So I've tried to have a bit of a breakdown of his career and to put the record straight. So that's this Friday, and then next week we start on the podcast on a Wednesday with the Daniel Craig retrospective, I suppose, of his action 15 years, and then on a Friday it's the podcast on the Wednesday and the YouTube show on the Friday, and we keep rotating until hell freezes over.
And I do believe you have a Bond book coming out soon.
Yeah, the book will come out, dates to be finalised, but it's due to be October to coincide with the 60th anniversary. Bond Stunts is the title of the book, and so that's a look at the 60 years of the action and all of the action sequences and the stunt performers and the stories behind all of that. So that's happening.
And well, of course, there'll be links in the show notes below for information on all of that. Ashley, what about you?
Easiest place to get hold of me if you want to scream at me is on Twitter at Ashley Lynch. Other than that, I'm just going to shout out the new season of Lego Ninjago, which I edit, which will be starting, I think, later this month, or early next month. I'm not sure of the exact date, but coming out soon, and it's pretty epic. And also the other podcast I'm co-host, Girls on Pop, which you can find at the After the Credits Network, which is atcpod.ca.
And yeah, we'll put links in the show notes below. And where is Ninjago playing?
It depends on where you are. I believe in US and Canada, it's on Cartoon Network. Elsewhere in the world, I'm not sure, but eventually it will be coming to Netflix for most people. So
I'm sure I've seen it around here.
Yeah,
I'm
check
sure.
wherever you are that the show shows up, and it's different depending on what territory you're in.
Well, again, Jon, Ashley, thank you very much for your time this evening. Your chems are in the post.
Thank you very much.
Super. Great pleasure. Thank you.
And there you go, folks. That was our chat. That was our roundtable on the Jason Bourne franchise. It might be the last time we ever discuss Jason Bourne on this show, unless he magically reappears from the water once again.
Although, Patreon commentary,
Yes, you never know, Cam. But next week, what are we talking about?
Yes, we are actually going to be talking about a movie that probably took a bit of inspiration from the Bourne franchise. We are going to check in with Angelina Jolie, our first Jolie entry. There's a number of films that will feature her in the future on the podcast. This is going to be the first. We're going to talk about 2010's Salt.
Yeah, one I don't think I've ever actually seen, but I feel like I've seen a lot of it just through osmosis and just seeing clips online. So I'm really actually looking forward to finally ticking that one off. And we're joined once again by M from the Verbal Diorama podcast, who joined us last time for Die Another Day. This should be a corker.
That's right. I'm hoping to pepper you with questions.
That joke assaulted me.
Oof.
Yeesh. Guys, we've been at it for 2.5 hours here. Give us a break.
The jokes need some seasoning.
Well, if you would love our jokes and you like what you hear on the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. It's completely free, and it does us the world of good when it comes to finding new listeners out there in the ever-growing world of podcasts. And if you want to contact us, discreetly, of course, do not forget to follow us on social media at SpyHards, that's SPYHARDS, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, you should get some rest. You look tired.
Hello, my name is Chris Carr. I'm a filmmaker and podcaster. Join me as I take a look at the world of espionage, terrorism, geopolitics, and organised crime on my podcast, Secrets and Spies, available on all podcast apps.
This is manna from spy heaven.